like have any area.
So.
But if you're
My younger brother are really, really good buddies. See that all the time.
but it's you need two short staff essentially. To keep doing work that can be on that.
If they, I was under, they was training.
Yeah.
There's crazy.
Well,
Good times.
That thing's on the track.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
yeah. Well, good.
So, is there any particular reason that members of the public are in the dark?
Oh. It's good this light switch is.
Literally not figuring.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. We say if I could be that long side of the, maybe happy here.
And that's true.
Michael, did you scare everybody off? It seems like we had a smaller group.
I'm hoping it's the weather.
I did, right?
I will say from some of my on-premises work sessions, some members of that industry seem to arrive late occasionally.
Huh?
So we'll see.
There may be a pattern, huh?
It could be.
About 1 minute.
I
They're not
I
late yet.
didn't. There's been a lot of enthusiasm, so I'd be surprised if
Yeah.
a number of more faces don't arrive soon.
I would think there's gonna be more.
There'll be, it's probably just traffic and everything right now with the weather, everybody's kind of.
I hope nobody's just sitting down in 326 since we met there last week.
Hopefully they got.
You have to stop off at every floor every time and just look.
Oh, I know.
We're only 300 or more.
This is a nicer room if we're expecting a crowd.
Mm.
Taller ceilings, so we can see a few more people.
Let's say, if you want me to run down, I can walk down and see if anyone's down.
There wasn't anyone when I was
Okay.
on that.
Okay.
It was dark.
Okay.
Clearly not the right room. Yes, that was my question.
So Michael, have the meetings been going to the on premise? I know you guys.
I think really, yeah.
You,
I think really productive.
excellent. Glad to hear that.
Got a lot of very solid feedback, had some hearts to hearts about enforcement.
Sure.
I think they, came to these meetings with their understanding of the best interests of like the local business community and
You are keeping public comment, right? That
Yes.
is the entire point of this.
well, yes, but the reason they're asking is because of the work session. You don't have to, but I don't know why we would have scheduled this particular meeting if we weren't. Oh. Alyssa, that packet material next to you, can you get over to Betsy if you don't mind? Thank you.
Thank you for printing
Thank you.
out. It's really helpful.
I did not print out, just to bring you up, the public comment that I emailed you.
Yeah.
But this is what I've received throughout the day. This has mostly been, I think, driven as a response to the Helena IR story that came out yesterday. And then some of my people that dropped in today, I'd like to summarize my notes on their commentary if I can get a chance to do that at some point.
I say we should go ahead and start. It's 6:02.
we do have some folks here, so I want to respect everybody's time and ideally not stay here until 9 tonight, if we can avoid that. Good evening, everyone. Do we have anybody online?
We have 2 members online.
Okay, perfect.
2 members.
My name is Rebecca Harbidge. I'm the chair of the zoning commission. I thank you for being here and sharing your evening with us. I understand some of you also shared your whole day with the city, so much appreciated for your attention on the sign code updates. I think we could do quick intros of the zoning commission members who are here as well.
I'm Kim Wilson, I'm on the zoning commission.
Alyssa Swanson, zoning commission. Betsy Story, I'm on the zoning commission.
Great, thank you. And we do have an agenda, so we've gone through roll call. We have a quorum present. Up for discussion tonight, obviously, is the sign ordinance. I think a lot of what we are interested in hearing tonight is your comments on the draft that was shared previously. Any additional feedback that was not, that we didn't have time to cover a few weeks ago, this month, a few weeks ago. So I think with that, what I'd like to do is have Michael start by just summarizing and sharing with us the conversations you have had. If you're comfortable
And
with
can I just
that.
ask to clarify, this document you left for us, who's yellow or what's yellow and what's purple? In terms of the redlining.
So. I have like 4 of these out in front of me right now. On premises draft. All right, yeah, we can just get into it. So, purple is new text or edits. It's just track changes. Due to a working on it, just Sunday and then again on Monday, my track changes are both in blue and purple.
Okay.
Sorry, track changes just as far as I'm concerned. That bit in yellow, I just highlighted it because it is a wholly new section. It is there to replace that aggregation of signage provision, which was for, I think, its intent, far too small in terms of describing its applicability and what it aimed to do. This is a administrative level control. It's a first pass at it. My guess is after legal gets on it or a little bit further review, we would want to put in a provision on it of public notice and that something is being planned, just to add that in there and get feedback from neighbors on it. But it would give administrative control. The idea is, since we don't have a shopping center CUP to handle these sort of signage collections or the sign packages altogether necessarily anymore, and we're trying to move away from CUPs, that we would have a staff level control to okay a design package that we find aligns with the intent of the sign code, even if it goes beyond the letter. There's a couple of new sign types that I think would be applicable here. And with the way that we would handle if you're moving forward, the incidental signs, a incidental major and an incidental minor. Again, these ideas probably need to be fleshed out a little bit more. But to allow for secondary signage that is larger than a directional sign at a second entrance or something like that. And at the discretion of staff, however, either a complaint or the applicant, if they don't like what the staff comes up with working with them, can then appeal to the Board of Adjustments. Which for those in the rooms who don't necessarily enjoy working with the Board of Adjustments, in about a year or two, because of state law, they'll be moving towards the planning commission, which will be a new entity, combining the Board of Adjustments and the zoning commission, and taking on new roles and responsibilities. That is mandated by state law that we go into that direction.
Thanks, so that's all I just
That
wanted to
might
get-
be too much shot.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know kind of what was what. Okay,
Okay,
take it away.
Okay, let's start with a summary of what you've heard since our last meeting. If
Yeah.
you don't mind. And
uh,
then I don't think you need to specifically go through page by page and line by line, because we can get to that afterwards. I just want to give us the highlights.
so. Comments from local on-premise sign industry persons has come basically in two forms. One is that letter from the Northwest Sign Council, composed by James Carpentier. That highlights their major concerns. One is that, time frame on electronic signs, flipping. They want to maintain the current standard of 7.5 seconds. There's an issue with the way that wall signage reads and is measured, he contends that it's a drop from 30% of wall signage down to 3%. And it's been a conversation about having those numbers read in sort of reverse, where the city right now has a aggressive cap on the top end, but then a very generous allowance of the prior to that cap, of percentage of the facade or percentage of the building that can be covered in a sign. This code sort of inverts that, where we offer a minimum amount, as you guys know, and then have a much more restrictive scaling percentage that goes up. A consensus feeling, as I understand it from the on-premises people, is that 24 square foot floor for a facade is far too low. And so they're getting some nods here. I think a recommendation of 60 square foot as a minimum. And then if they want to debate the 3% scaling above that, I'll leave that to them. But as a floor, just a higher floor for a facade to start your count from. Also, they want to be able to do electronic sign faces, full face, for freestanding signs.
You say that again?
What?
What was that last bit?
Freestanding signs where, there we go. Your summary is a little bit easier to use than James. I knew I had it. Basically, the full face of a freestanding sign, allowing it to be an electronic
Oh, right.
message center where those are permitted.
Regardless of size of the freestanding sign.
Where in zones where we're permitting the electronic message centers, just allowing it to be full face if somebody wanted their sign to go in that direction, as opposed to restricting it to the 50% or high end of 75 square feet. Essentially, they're saying it's their impression that we are going to accidentally be mandating uglier signs as they get split up into two different mediums. And they just want to be able the flexibility to give the business owner the sign that they're asking for. Is that an accurate understanding? All right. Hoping I can get more nods as I talk. If I'm summarizing your words. So monuments be 12 feet rather than 6 feet. This goes to that the safety email that I sent along for legibility of signs for motor vehicles, basically just making them big enough to be seen from the roadway.
American Planning Association, is that the American Planning Association resource that you
Yes.
sent?
Correct. Redoing the brightness standards to 0.3 foot handle above ambient light. You'll notice there's a big new chart there on recommended distances for measuring that. I do think, even though that chart seems long, it would vastly simplify enforcement on measuring those things and reduce the cost and equipment. It does seem to be the standard as opposed to the NITS gun, which we were previously had in there. They're asking for an additional freestanding sign per street frontage and additional freestanding signs for each outlot. The directional sign, it's removing the content regulation, which to allow for logos, etc. I think we're just not handling. I think it's safer to follow James Carpentier's recommendation to not handle them as directional signs and handle them as incidental minors. Substitution clause, you'll see that we added that in there. That is generic language taken from other substitution clauses in other codes. It helps keep us more content neutral. We've done a very good job with content neutrality for this code, but it can't hurt to include that substitution clause. The temporary signs section, there are some specific pointers on that James Carpentier had given me that aren't on premises necessarily voiced from them, but generally having an amount of handling A-frames or whatever, however they want to handle it, wrapping A-frames into that, or just however they want to handle it, but giving them an allotment and just letting them divvy it up and an allotment of square footage. I think would handle that issue. And then to allow animation as well.
Moving things.
Yes. So there is, and I guess the note on that is, the animation still wouldn't be allowed to sort of conflict with official things. They couldn't have something that like something that looked like police lights up there, or something that caused a traffic or visual hazard, or something that mimicked a traffic signal or something, or anything like that. But to allow a scrolling message or otherwise. Other resources I believe I provided for you talked about traffic safety and that they would contend that electronic message centers do not drive an increase in accidents. For make sure I can move on from that particular document. Some of the recommended changes are sort of best handled if we were to go through that on premises draft. One thing that didn't make it in here that I do want to note before I forget about it is not allowing banners as permanent signage. That is it was my intention to get in here, but I missed it. This is a little bit of a rush job, I apologize.
So an update to allow banners?
Update to not,
To not allow.
to specifically say that banners cannot be used as permanent signage.
Gotcha.
One thing that came up about enforcement is that I'm sorry, before I get into it, pole banners, to create an exemption for pole banners.
Like in
Basically,
downtown.
basically anywhere, if they're working with
But I'm-
Northwest Energy
Is
or.
that what it means?
Oh, yeah,
when you say
yeah,
pole
like
banner?
those, yeah, I'm sorry, so
Yeah.
a flag top and bottom from a light pole. Just to, allow that, period. Just to make those permitted. However, we want to include that, I have some language in here, I at least, define them in here, I don't know, we could stick them in exempt or whatever the zoning commission, however they want to treat them, but I do think it is a sign type in town and it should be defined at the very least. So feather flags, pennants, streamers, that sort of thing, basically to lift the ban on those. Not necessarily the balloons, but the rest of it, so that the local sign companies can sell such items. Basically, they feel like they're just losing those sales to online sales since there's no enforcement on the back end anyway. They're basically being punished for following the law since we don't have an enforcement officer or an enforcement mechanism fast enough to actually deal with it. So until such a time as the city gets an enforcement officer and a faster enforcement mechanism to allow their sale and allow that to be a part of their sales package.
Holding my questions. I have a question.
Yeah. It's inevitable at this point that I'm gonna be forgetting stuff. I apologize to everybody. Notes from today, some clarification on whether existing flashing signs or ones that have light effects of, say, light up bulbs or things like that have an existing flashing effect, whether or not that would be grandfathered in, or we're asking them to turn that off. A better understanding of that impact. A request from Dax Citrero, he's the owner of Village Pizza and the Rialto. He thinks it is important to his business and attracting attention to a sign to have an animated reader board. He's out there on 12 Highway 1211. Another person who came in today was a sign industry professional, but not here in town as an although maybe starting a business here. Would like to see a design in the design section, monument signs listed in 1123.9 in the where the design standards for it to get its own page to better illustrate what we mean by monument signs. Thinks that suspended height signs should be 6 feet, not 5 feet. Reiterates the point that the floor is too low on commercial wall signage. Brought up a good point about projecting signs. We currently allow them to project, and this is a copy and paste out of the existing codes, up to 10 feet off the wall. He was just like, that is wild. Why do you do that? It would be a difficult sign to manufacture, I would defer to the other people in the room, but I don't know if you guys have ever done a projecting sign at 10 feet projection. So we could probably reduce that number. One clarification on the portion there, that is a copy and paste from the existing sign code on the sign appearing to be free of brace wires and other additional things. Bracing material. And one hopes that we will produce a user guide at the end of all this. Kathy Macefield, who is a historic preservation officer, came in at the end of the evening and asked us to do better tracking of facade easements and to put up some sort of restriction of signs on historic buildings, to make sure that the buildings aren't being damaged by poorly done signs, or the facade easements are this has been a regular complaint, poorly tracked in town. You have a letter from Pam Attardo that she also handed off, and I've made a copy for everybody here for you to get into at some point. I will not get into the other printout comments that I've gotten. They range wildly. When you, and I defer to you about when you would like to get into the rest of the on-premise sign code changes as I understand them in this draft, not a draft.
Oh, we have one comment and then that from Jeff Young that says yes, we both can signs it, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Noted.
Okay.
I think, let's see, let's just zoning commission. Do you have questions for Michael? Right off the bat.
We have a friendly comment as well.
Do we want to go
I would like to have
in order?
zoning commission questions based on what Michael just told us, not necessarily line by line through the ordinance. And then I'm interested in hearing from folks who are joining us. What works best for you all? Would you like to provide your comments to us generally, or would you like us to go through the ordinance page by page and take comment on each section separately? So we'll start with questions while you think about that, and we'll ask.
Well, with the light section, so we're just doing a straight up level by size and no differentiation between daylight or nighttime. It's just the same,
So
correct?
yeah, so it's above ambient light.
Mhm.
So as it gets darker out, the sign would appear brighter. So
It would need to.
Yeah,
adjust. Gotcha.
and we would leave in the provision there that it needs to be automatically dimming to hit those
Right.
light requirements.
That does seem a lot better. Yeah. Question?
So I had a few questions on the Northwest sign letter, mainly, and I think from my perspective, most of those points are well taken. And I see some of them have already been incorporated into your draft changes, but I'm curious on the 30% of the facade going down to 3%. What was the reasoning for that in the first place? And can you explain that a little better?
Yeah, so the way it currently reads in the sign, in the ordinance, is there's a hard cap at 200. So even as you're building, so if your facade scaled up 30% of it, once you hit a facade of 667 square feet, you're hard capped at 200, and it doesn't matter if your facade total in aggregate on all four sides is actually 3,000 square feet, you're still hard capped at 200. So we're running into this issue where big box stores, mostly big box stores, but other just larger buildings. Every single time they're coming in for a variance. We have found a number, the 3% seems to be the around the amount negotiated between the Board of Adjustments and these applicants for those variants. Fairly regularly recently.
Is it 3% on top of a baseline amount, or is it just 3% of the whole facade?
It's 3%, so once they get over, so they're allowed them up to 24 square feet regardless, the way the draft had been written. And then as 3% of the facade goes above 24%, they're then allowed more. So 24, the 24 square feet is a floor. So instead of having a hard cap on the top end and a generous percentage of the facade below that, it's a minimum amount of signage that you're guaranteed to have regardless of the side of your facade, and then a smaller percentage of the facade total scaling upwards. And everybody in the on-premises sign guys has told me the floor is too low at 24 square feet.
Are they okay with the 3% above that if the floor was high enough?
I don't necessarily want to speak to them. Their ire was definitely at the 24 square feet. I think there's probably a little bit more workshopping with them to find the right scaling percentage above them. I would have to say that they think 3% is likely too small.
So when you say the Board
They're
of
not
Adjustment,
necessarily just thinking of the big box stores.
right, so when you say the Board of Adjustment has approved routinely something along the lines of 3%, can you give an example?
Yeah, sure. So the US Chef store is about 3%. And on North Sanders, that was a targeted area. Those stores tend to be around 3%.
Okay.
You would know off the top of your head how we did with Benefit, or you might not. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. But Benefice and Walmart ended up under 3%, I think.
Benefice did, Walmart was a special case because they already had a variance in place for more signage.
Okay,
It was still somewhere in that realm, but they already had a variance allowing them 450 square feet of that.
at 450, there's probably at or. I thought we had calculated that one.
Yeah, it was in
And-
that 3% realm.
So that is a particularly large store, that Walmart, and 450 is about the same square footage as those North Sanders stores, which generally are smaller, so.
So I guess what I'd be interested in tonight is whether there's interest from the members of the public here on, moving that 24 square feet up, and if so, for what? And does that then stay with the 3%, or do you also bump up to 3%?
So they've asked for 60 square feet,
Okay,
and they didn't speak directly to the 3%. 30% would be my understanding pretty darn high and irregular for the sign industry. But to say that the correct answer is between 3 and 30%, I realize isn't particularly helpful.
okay. And just one other question.
I don't know that we necessarily have the number to
Okay.
scale yet,
Okay.
above the 60s.
Well, I imagine
that
we'll
they're
hear
asking.
some of that tonight. So the other question I had was the electronic sign, 8 minutes versus 7.5 seconds. Where or why did we come up with the 8 minutes?
It was
Um,
a different report that we got from a different public comment early on.
it was from a public comment. That seems to be wildly irregular, so.
That's very long. And just to, I think you mentioned it earlier, the 7.5 seconds is currently in code. Is that true? Helena?
It's given as a 8 rotations, I think, per minute,
Okay.
or 8 Yeah,
Okay.
which just ends up being 7.5 seconds.
Okay.
So I have a related question to that, if it's okay. So to me, that means no animation, because you're changing your sign more frequently than 7.5 seconds.
So when they're asking for the animation, they're saying that the displayed message that's up there for 7.5 seconds is allowed to have movement. Is my understanding. So it's allowed to do a 7.5 second, basically advertisement,
So you can have a 7.5 movie playing.
7.5
is-
second movie.
That is allowable to
It-
show 7.5 second. Move. That would be fine.
That's a comment that we've gotten.
Yeah, I'm
It-
just asking, so as written. And based on those comments, like that would be. And we would just decide. If they have a break between them, that would be an adequate. Change of message.
Yeah, I mean, currently, we're banning a swipe between, we're saying you can't swipe between messages, you can't do like a wipe of the board, or. If we have, with our current language, you can't scroll up the new text for the next message, you can't, drop in each different letter or animate it in that sort of way. And they're asking for, that restriction to be lifted so that what they do to bring that message into play, or to have a message up there that has, I don't know, pumpkin spice latte and it's got snowflakes falling behind it up there. Currently, we're saying you can't do that because
Right,
that's video. Yeah. So they're asking to have that restriction lifted. So that they can do their, 7.5 second vignette of various types.
Yeah, I'm just curious though. I would decide that it's a. Not a different message. Anyway, carry on, I'm sorry.
You have more questions?
I don't know.
I just have a question about what you said from the owner of Rialto and Village Inn. He said about flashing signs,
Mm.
whether or not they should be grandfathered in. I guess, what do you mean by flashing signs?
So, yeah, so he's got a large freestanding sign out front. For the sake of argument, we'll call it 120 square feet. And he's got light bulbs that are on the outside edge of it.
Mm,
And
right.
one of those bulbs turns off sequentially and it just like, so it like it's racing around the outside of that frame. That's my understanding of it and memory of it. And he's just wondering whether or not he needs to turn that off essentially, or whether or not, since it's been that way for 20 years or X number of years, he's going to be allowed to keep that on.
Okay,
And if we could add some clarifying language.
I mean, would that be considered historical? I mean, I don't know how old it is, but I'm imagining like the old one around the Rialto anyway, it's probably been there for a long time. But I don't know if that's something the zoning commission wants to consider, is like how to preserve those, or if they should, or I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, some of these things are been around for a while and are, not that I want to interject myself, but into the conversation, but I would imagine he considers this to just be a character of that neighborhood. It's been there, it's an institution, that sign's been out front. And it's carrying forth that character, and we would be asking to change that character by asking him to now handle his sign differently. So.
Cause I guess I still don't really understand the difference between the different way signs are lit. And I guess how the flashing sign would be not allowed under our current sign code. You know what I mean?
So you were specifying a difference between electronic display faces versus just a light bulb.
Right.
Which seems different
Yeah,
than what we were talking about.
well, yeah, and so, and we may need to add clarifying language for, something, when we say like a pulsing light or something that that does that.
Hmm.
That we are talking about a bulb pulsing as opposed to an electronic message display and its display of a video image or something. And just to make sure that we're handling them differently. It also could be that it's a little nitpicky and we don't necessarily want to wade into these waters, but that is for you to decide. Not
I guess one last question. There were a couple of emails about, public art. And are we considering whether some forms of public art would be considered signage, or do we want to specifically talk about exempting that from the sign ordinance?
Sure, so I've struggled with our definition of the sign and then our applicability in going through, and I think we could really bolster our case quite a bit if we add phrasing about whether or not a sign is on premises or off premises within each definition of a sign that we're now regulating. Because then we get to the heart of the matter of whether or not that we're regulating that structure and not its message. And we do get to control, you know, or we do have jurisdiction over on premise and off premise.
I don't know, any other questions?
I did have one question, follow up on something you said, which was about the like feather flags, festoons, etc. Does the city currently enforce against businesses that are selling prohibited sign types? I appreciate folks not selling things that are not legal in the city, but I'm just curious.
No.
Okay.
We're fairly lax in enforcement in several areas. I will be meeting with the HCC tomorrow night, who one of their functions is to make budget recommendations. I'm definitely going to include my presentation that they should the consideration of a recommendation of funding and a zoning enforcement officer. I won't say that I don't mean to phrase that as city staff asking for it, but to say that that is something that has been a topic of conversation that is in their scope of recommendation. I will again reiterate, city staff doesn't actually have an opinion.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions? Zoning commission? No. All right. Are there questions or general comments from folks who are joining us? I know we have
Yeah.
a couple of comments online.
It's online and one hand raised online. Earl Charles had 3 comments.
I'm guessing the 60 square foot floor, Earl, is related to the wall signage.
Same with the large box from general retail comment was
Okay.
part of that.
And then animation, most animations are entrance or exit of the message, with the message itself being stagnant for most of the time. I appreciate that, thanks.
Just to add to that, video wouldn't be solid. This is not what they're intended for. It wouldn't be recommended by anybody professional, that's for sure.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm for them.
I would like to hear just questions or general
Yeah.
comments from everybody first.
Can they identify themselves?
Yeah.
I've got a couple.
If you can introduce yourself just for the record, please.
The facade thing in the strip malls is gonna get a little interesting, cause like what defines their area, cause you've got a big building with a strip mall. And if they have a small front, their front and back, that 3% is gonna be tiny for them.
Yeah.
And then even the 24 square feet, like if they want a sign in front, a sign in back, that's getting really small front and back. So that one there. And then there's a couple flashing signs like Village Inn, Sun's Hut, Last Chance Casino, Montana Nugget Casino, and RV Drive-In. Those are some pretty iconic signs in Helena. They're all pretty cool. I think leaving them grandfathered is fine. I don't see it as an unfair. And it's really not something you're gonna see in the construction of a modern sign. Does it happen? Yes. Often, no. I've never had a request for it in the 10 years I've been doing this. So I don't really think it's gonna be something you're gonna see a whole lot of request for. I think in certain instances, variances, you know, in older buildings and districts, it could be kind of cool to see a modern, old school sign built. And it just goes in the look of the building and or the fit. So I think telling the people that have it now that they have to turn it off would be out of line a little bit.
I guess maybe something else to consider there too is the illumination and brightness. You know, if you could find a way to make sure that they're conforming with the electronic message boards within that reason, so they're not, you know, blinding. It's not like a strobe light, it's more of just an accent for decoration.
And for the record, this is Clay and Gentry Painter, and they are representing signs now.
Fast.
Fast signs, I'm so sorry.
And I guess I would ask, the first time you talk, introduce who you are, and then you don't have to do that, but that'd be great.
And I think we, just for folks who are commenting, we are all taking notes. I know I have a handful of questions that I am interested in hearing from you all on, so I think we'll hear general comments and then zoning commission can ask questions. Is there anyone else in the room?
My name is Kelly Strobel with Lamar Out Advertising. First of all, thank you guys for your time, and I appreciate the door being cracked open to this. This was not going to be an easy or fun ride for anybody on premise or off premise. As you can see, what has been drafted off premise is basically being eliminated. So, which obviously on our side of it, we would like to propose just to adopt the current regs that are currently in place and discuss, maybe open the door for discussion in regards to the digital side of it. And just listening to the current digital signage conversation, as it's been mentioned, and on obviously on premise and off premise are completely two different animals. I believe that on premise and off premise, the digital signs are all basically constructed the same. So they all have a dimming portion built into the sign structure. So when it's darker, it's going to become a little brighter. When the sun's out, or just reverse, I apologize, but there is a dimming mechanism built into the sign, and that's federally regulated because they can only be so bright. They're not, as it's been also mentioned, it's not designed for animation. We don't want animation on ours. And, you know, some are gonna have the snowflakes and stuff like that for the on-premise sign, which is completely fine and it looks good. When it comes to the off-premise, again, a completely different sign, a completely different animal. We don't want that. That's not the intent of it to be. It's the intent of it is obviously for safety, it's cleaner. As an end user customer, they have an easier way to save them monies for production. I mean, there's a whole background that goes into it, but we just would like to open, and I know it's jumping around from on-premise to off-premise back and forth. And we would also, if we can't get the current regs adopted and open up for discussion for digital, if that's what we need to do, we're open for that. But to just eliminate them is, I think, needs to definitely be discussed. I don't think it's the right direction to go that the city wants to go. The other thing is on-premise is going to be a big enough uphill battle. So even if it is open for discussion for writing or adopting something for off-premise, maybe we propose to do that at a later date that's just strictly off-premise. That way it doesn't get mixed and matched and lost in amongst on-premise and off-premise back and forth, so nobody's confused. As long as they do, I feel they do need to stay separate, so they each have their own battles type thing, so. That's what I propose, and like I said, I don't wanna continue going back and forth to on premise and off premise, so. Cause it does get confusing for the people that are not in the industry, so. But I appreciate you guys' time, and like I say, it's definitely a long uphill battle, and I mean, there's no real good way to start. At least it's open, and truly appreciate you guys' time and willing to open up and allow the industries to get their input in.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and honestly, we were expecting this to be a lot more of a battle, and we really appreciate willingness to work with us to just come to a common understanding and build this together, because we need a new sign code. It's way outdated.
For sure.
But to work together as a community with the community, because we represent so many more people than just ourselves. We're
100%.
in business, that's what we do. We work with business, and even with personal people. But so just the willingness to hear what we have to say and our expertise, I think that's awesome. I think that's a huge step, and that's not gonna make this as painful as we thought it was gonna be.
100%. And as I mentioned before, we just went through this in Billings, and it was a 2-year process, and it was a constant, it was literally a fight. It was crazy, but again, and honestly, even the on-premise and off-premise businesses together work together. They do different, we all kind of join hands, to be honest with you, and it doesn't work if nobody's open arms and willing to listen and write something that works together. It's a blessing that you guys are actually opening your arms and hearing our input, because otherwise it just becomes it's like two rams butting heads and it's not gonna go anywhere, type thing. So, but again, I appreciate it, and we all appreciate it as the outdoor industry, as well as the on-premise industry. So it'll definitely go a lot smoother by having you guys listen and hear and then working back and forth. So truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm Allie Carly. I'm with Lamar Advertising as well, and I fully agree with what Kelly just stated. We appreciate you guys taking the time to meet with us and taking everything into consideration that we suggest. To his point, separating the off and on premise, I think is incredibly important, because yes, we're all in the same industry of signs, but they're two polar opposite entities. And so I think to cause confusion, that can happen. So separation would be really great, and we definitely support that. And then to Kelly's other points, we obviously would prefer to adopt the current sign regulations, and if not, have a later discussion on that, just so that way anything on premise will be discussed now, and we can move forward with an off-premise discussion separately. And to their point of not only working with the business community, we also work with so many nonprofit sectors as well that we support on a day-to-day basis. We also support a lot of weather triggers, emergency alert services, and we certainly want to make sure we still have the opportunity to make Helena aware of what's going on in the community here at large. So definitely appreciate the time, the consideration, and happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thank you.
Bob Alvarez, Yes Go Outdoor Media. I think Kelly and Allie did a great job kind of voicing the industry concerns. I represent the outdoor sector within my company from Montana. I agree that the current regulations that they are would be preferable. Obviously, we're not pro eliminating billboards within the city. But just to kind of go on what both of them had indicated, I think that taking on both sectors as one is really going to convolute the challenge of putting together effective regulation. I do think separating the two is going to be much more effective and kind of getting everybody to that final goal. I know staff and the on-premise folks have already been meeting quite a bit and had a lot of successful meetings. And I think if we're able to do that on the off-premise side, that also may be more helpful in finding some sort of final game plan for the city to move forward on. But, thank you very much for your time. Happy to come down here and very much enjoy the process. So.
Thanks, Bob. I'm Ben Tony with Yesco. I work with Bob, but I'm more on the on-premise sign side of things, excuse me. Just like everybody's mentioned tonight, we're here to be a professional voice and teach and explain and make this a win-win for everybody involved, both on the outdoor side and on the on-premise side, for the big box people, for the mom and pops. We want to make sure that this is in the best interest for everyone involved. We appreciate the voice that Michael's allowed for us to express and over emails and our walk-in sessions and our meetings. So anyways, we just appreciate everybody with open ears and allowing for us to come in and chime in and make this right, because like Clay was saying, we obviously need to make this right. It's overdue. And we just, again, want to make sure that it's a win-win for everybody involved. So I just appreciate the time. So thank you.
Thanks. Would you like to speak? Or we'll go online? Okay.
We have a couple of comments online from Earl Charles.
Thank you for the feedback, Earl. Earl agrees that off-premise, on-premise should be considered separately as parts of the code.
And then we have 2 hands raised online.
Okay, and James, you had your hand raised first, so we'll start with you. If you have general comments or questions, we will get to the point in the meeting when we walk through the ordinance and talk specifics, but for general, go ahead, James.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great, great. Once again, it's I just wanted to echo what everyone's been saying. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to provide input, and Michael and the commission here committee has been great on taking input, and I did get a chance to look at some of the comments, some of the rough draft comments that Michael made, and we appreciate the incorporation of many of our suggestions. And just I may have missed something, but just based upon what I looked at and what I've also heard is we definitely need to just work a little bit more on the wall signs. And I don't know where those numbers should fall, but the 3% for some of the bigger boxes will work probably, as Michael indicated, but it certainly will not work on every frontage or every, for the smaller type of businesses. So we need to figure out numbers there that will work. And I know that's the goal, which I think is great. So we'll be more than willing to do whatever we can to help on that end. And the other thing too, that I didn't make comments on originally, but as a result of some of the input, there's some interest on savings and allowing the vintage signs to remain. And there's a really good ordinance that I can pass on to you, Michael. It's Salt Lake City has one of the better vintage sign ordinances in the country, and it's a really good starting point because as was indicated by Michael, they become neighborhood icons and important to the folks that live there. So I will be more than happy to pass it on, and I would suggest that you include some language that literally it exempts those from the allowances for sites, so that there's an incentive to save them versus having to tear them down because they don't comply and all that stuff, which I've run into many times. So I think that those are the 2 areas from what I can see that needs work on. There may be something else, but we're here to help and do whatever we can to make the code work as well as it possibly can. So with that, thanks for your input, and look forward to continue working with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, next up, it looks like Jeff, you have your hand raised. You should be able to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to us and listening to us, Michael and group. And I want to convey appreciation to our friends within our industry. We compete against each other every day, we come together on these issues, we do so pretty quickly and fairly concisely. And James Carpentier is a big part of that. You mentioned he's with the Northwest Sign Council. James represents the International Sign Association, one of two in the country. And so James comes with deep wisdom and advice and experience with literally hundreds of communities. And so, James, thank you on our behalf for everything you do for us. Yesco is a 103-year-old company, a sign company. We're on Bozeman Avenue, just south of the airport. And we very much appreciate being part of the community. And not only that, but representing the interests of our customers who number in the hundreds and hundreds. So first off, we support the letter from James wholeheartedly. We worked very hard to get our thoughts concise there. We favor animation. And the codes we've seen that talk about animation, it's pretty easy to say you can animate, but don't pulsate, don't scintillate. And if you wanted to put in flashing in there, you could. And then what happens is then the animations become much more subdued than having something that is an irritant. So instead of getting into the discussion about transitions and morphing and talking about snowflakes and American flags, it always gets kind of in a a rat hole. You just kind of go down and you just can't get out. A rabbit hole, not a rat hole, rabbit hole. We'd recommend the animation, excluding pulsation and scintillation. We agree with separating the billboard discussion wholeheartedly. We are a very strange company, and then we have an on-premise business, and we also have a billboard business. So as you can clearly see, Bob is there representing our outdoor billboard interests. Our leadership is completely set up differently for our billboard business, and our on-premise leadership and teams are functioning separate from, and so that's what I'm addressing here. I want to mention about size. This, I have to say, most small businesses and most medium-sized businesses, it's hard. And if any of you in the room have tried to run a business, it feels as if there's a constant headwind from all sorts and places. And our customers struggle. They struggle to make a buck. They struggle to get enough customers in to keep their businesses going. And as we start to squeeze on them in their ability to advertise, there's a direct effect in how successful they can be. And so it's hard for us as sign companies to come in and say, oh yeah, our customers need big signs, because you think all we're talking about is our own personal interests. But we lease a lot of our signs to our customers so they don't pay up front. We're end up being partners with them. We make the investment on their behalf, and they pay us over time. And we see those that go out of business, it's very present. So whatever we can do on size to help the business community is better. And the speed limit, we don't often think about the speed limit. We don't think about setback enough. We don't think about reading distances. We also don't think about the aging population. And if you're trying to find somewhere and you're looking for it and can't see it, we've all done this. We pass it and then we go around the block or try to make a U-turn. That whole thing is just not safe. And we're getting older as a population. So I would just say that as we talk about this and get to our workshops and work on a code, I would just emphasize as best I can the interest our customers have in being able to advertise their businesses as good as they can. I posed a question to someone in the room. I said, does Walmart sell sandwiches? And somebody said, what do you mean? And I said, well, is there a sandwich shop in Walmart? And the Subway sign from the street there, yeah, we all know the Subway logo, but if somebody's not looking, that in my mind, it's an example of a sign that's just too small. From the setback is so far, it's not, that particular sign doesn't work for me. And like Coy just said a minute ago, you have these tenant spaces where with some setback where they can't literally be legible from the street because they need 2 or 3 stories of signage. And so they need some more square footage too. So that's all the discussion I'll put on that. I will say in finality here, the 4,000 Kelvin provision you had in the initial code, we are so grateful you crossed it out. Very, very happy. That 0.3 foot candles above ambient light is magical. It's beautiful. And if nothing else comes from this discussion by enacting that code, we wanted to make sure that you understood that we'll work arm in arm with the city and with our customers to be sure that they all conform to that lighting standard. Because most of the concerns people have about signs can be mitigated by adopting a standard such as that. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another.
All right, Nathan Young, you're up. You can go ahead and unmute.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Michael and team, for allowing this session to occur. My name is Nathan. I am from Yesco Outdoor Media, and I echo what has been already stated. We stand unified as a billboard or out-of-home industry with the current code that has been presented. We feel that additional conversation needs to occur and needs to be separated out. We feel strongly that we can come to a resolve on this that meets our needs and meets the city of Helena's needs. And as Alex so eloquently said as well, the billboard space offers a wonderful medium to big and small businesses, but then also to amazing nonprofits that have no other way to get their word out. And billboards are a fantastic avenue for that. And so I look forward to future discussions. And as an industry, we are unified and are open to continue to dialogue as we move forward to removing this piece and opening up more discussion ahead. Thanks again for the opportunity. And Michael, appreciate all that you've done for us as we've dialogued, and we'll look forward to the future. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further general comments, I think let's dive into the draft.
Sure.
Good. I think it seems like we could start perhaps with a discussion about the signs themselves. So if we skip to some of the tables, and I would like to hear from folks about the allowable building signage, allowable site signage, allowable display face types. And then I think also if we can hear from folks about the design standards by zoning district, I think that would be helpful too.
We have a document.
1123.5.
Yep. So starting on page 13 of the. Start there.
Technically speaking, this is not a new draft. This is a
memo.
memo.
Page 13 of the memo that was posted
Okay.
with tonight's materials.
I had no direction to alter from you guys. So
Okay.
this is
That
not a new draft. But
I think it's helpful to reflect some of the comments that you heard though, because we can still see what was stricken and what was substituted. So it's helpful to see it all in one place.
yes.
And also, thank you, and sorry earlier, where I was making pointed comments, but like what is going on here with the draft as well? How would this work and that type of thing to, which I think was more based on, you know, supposed to be responding to comment, when really I was getting more into the draft, so I just wanted to bring that up right now. Carry on.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So I starting on page 13 in section 1123.5. I'm not seeing that there are suggested changes to the allowable building signage. What is permitted or not permitted by district? So does that mean broadly speaking, we're on the right track with permitted, not permitted by district?
My comment for that would be. Before we start looking at district, we haven't really looked at districts or anything yet, because we're kind of looking at new definitions for a lot of things.
Okay. So these, you're saying these aren't even the right sign types to be talking about? Is that?
Yeah, yes and no, because,
Okay.
we've gone through, for example, the directional signage, and with the aggregate of, the sign program.
Mhm.
kind of hard to go through and decide where those fit, and we haven't really locked in a definition for that. If that makes sense, that was a really weird way to put that, but
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
If I could.
Yeah.
The focus of our on-premises conversations, the two that I've had, I don't want to say 1123.5 wasn't
Fair.
ever covered,
That's fair,
but
it wasn't.
it at no point became a topic of conversation or a focus point.
Okay.
So,
Can we start with the
perhaps we,
design guidelines
I
then?
think you'd all like another chance to review those.
We could, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just because I didn't hear that comment back from them. On the other hand, no comment also, no comment, we sometimes take as, this is fine.
Mhm.
In fact, we regularly do that, so I would encourage you to make a comment.
Yeah, and I guess given that we're on a timeline, I would ask that you could review and let us know as soon as you can, on all sections of the code. Otherwise, it is really hard to not assume that no comment means it's fine if you looked at other sections.
Also passing, we're available whenever, I don't know, I can't speak on these guys, but we're available for discussion whenever.
So would it make more sense to start with the design guidelines and talk about size and height allowances?
I'm gonna excuse myself because this is stuff these guys need to know to help me.
Thank you.
That's way over my head. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a kind of a process question? If we were to split out off-premise and on-premise sign discussions, what would that look like in terms of kind of reworking this document and the series of hearings or meetings and hearings that would be needed?
Sure, so essentially I would take what's currently on the books in city code for the off-premise signs or for billboards, that section, and pull it into city code. I would also need to just triple check with state code since it's been so long to make sure we're seeing eye to eye on those. I know they have regulations in place for distance between electronic message center digital billboards that's not reflected in our code. So I want to make sure that we're accurately reflecting state code, but by and large, I would just pull that in, take that out, essentially removing that as a discussion piece, but it would still be adopted.
So the existing code language as it related to off-premise signs would remain while we discuss on-premise signs, is that
Yeah,
what they're recommending?
and I think there's generally we can agree we're farther along with on-premise signs, and that's also where our code is probably, or is just more problematic across the board. That's the thing that we need to definitely be covering here, and with the off-premises signs, that's that would be more of a request from the zoning commission that we continue down that path, if you want, the path of not permitting them, if you wanted to go that way. But we would, yeah, we essentially would just pull in the existing language and update it to make sure that we've captured recent state rulings on it. And then I would imagine that would remove protest.
And to that point too, the off-premise is only about a page and a half. Versus there's so much more in the depth of on-premise because there's, you know, the wall signs and the canopies and everything else. The off-premise is pretty straightforward because we're only limited in so many zoning areas.
Right.
As well as the MDOT. So the MDOT, just to kind of give you a quick background if you're not aware, but MDOT, every state route that MDOT is basically considered on system, and a lot of those on system routes are through the cities. So we basically would have to go through the local municipality as well as the MDOT to get both permits approved prior to us putting a sign up. So if those can, I mean. Do they work hand in hand at times? Yes, sometimes no. So it's, you know, maybe the city's more restricted than the MDOT type thing. That does happen in case as well. But to be able to, if it was even an option to discuss it at a later date, I don't think it would take very long. Because of what's already in place, and then that's stuff that we all can talk about and get and tweak and make sure that we're all following the same rules and it works for everybody. I don't, like I say, the current regs are only, I think there's only like a page and a half is all of it, so I don't feel it would actually go all that, I mean, be drug out that long, honestly. I think in probably 1 or 2 meetings, if that, it could probably be handled and taken care of. And then you could, in the meantime, if need be, I could pull and send you guys, or we could send you guys the MDOT regs, just to kind of match apples to apples, so, and a lot of the MDOT regs follow. They don't, most of the time, MDOT is not gonna approve something that you guys, or the city doesn't approve. So,
Have the city approval prior to the MDOT.
and if the city doesn't approve it, it doesn't go anywhere. So it's, and they're usually about the same, the highway, industrial, commercials, you know, stuff like that. So it's, but we can definitely work on that and get you guys the information needed to help move it along just as quickly as possible too, because trust me, I understand, you don't want this drawn out any longer than you need to. I totally understand, so.
But we just do think it's key to separate that if at all possible.
I just think it'd be easier for you guys as well,
Sure.
as a suggestion.
Well, and I emailed you earlier about, what I would like to be able to present to the city commission is a package that they can separate. So I think if you're suggesting that the way to do that is to separate off premise from on premise, and we deal with the code updates that we need to make, because we need to make some updates to comply with law, that we present that package to city commission as this is what needs to happen. And then the zoning commission could decide if we want to make recommendations in addition to that on allowing or not allowing off premise or limiting off premise and how we want to address them. Then we could present that as a separate package.
Sure.
So the city commission doesn't look at it and say, nix the whole thing because we don't agree with what you want to do for off things. If that makes sense.
It does, and there's depending on what you mean by certain sentences in there, it doesn't. If we want to separate out off-premise discussion, and then have them be two. So the way this code is written is it wholly replaces the sign chapter. So the issue is, there's no regulation to fall back on if you are not adopting all parts of the package we bring forward. What I could do is potentially write out a sign code that's on premise, and then give 3 options and really implore city commission to adopt one of those, like 3 options or 2 options or whatever for off premises signs. But if they just say, I don't want to be in a situation where we have nothing.
Yeah, I agree.
So you could have
I
done
don't-
the current regulation.
Yeah, I don't mean necessarily, I mean, they definitely have to be split. I just basically for meeting purposes, you know what I mean? They can still be under the one package.
So delay the whole.
I'm just saying,
hearing.
as a whole,
Okay.
just for conversation and meeting purposes, separate them. And they do definitely have to be obviously distinguished off-premise and off-premise, but I guess I'd say separate, meaning I'm just saying, tomorrow we discuss off-premise, because you guys have obviously been working on the on-premise. And then you can still submit the entire package as a whole, which I completely understand. I mean, sign code's gotta be a sign code. I just was more for the conversation purposes to help streamline.
Mhm.
So these guys aren't wasting their time and wasting a day and a half for us, and likewise, I mean, it's all gonna kind of be brought up to the same.
Yeah.
It's like the efficiency.
Yeah,
it-
sorry, yeah. Wrong call.
If you're looking to break it out, and the first thing that we handle the must-dos, there's going to be the current off-premise sign language in there, since it's a wholly replacing thing, and that will be the new thing. And then if there's another vote after that, it would, we'd be bringing it forward as a second thing.
Right, yeah, so you would
Um,
add the current language,
But they would be re-adopting the current language first.
right?
And
Yep, I get
then
that.
discussing it secondly,
Next. I get that, yeah,
afterwards.
yeah, so your chapter that wholly replaces the existing, you would just need to add a section in there that has the current off-premises language.
Mhm.
And take that, yeah, get that. I guess, so in respect for, to the zoning commissioner's time, I don't know how much time we have for additional work sessions outside of, if we set aside 3 hours.
No, 100%.
We don't necessarily have another day to do that.
Yeah, today's the day, kind of the.
On the same timeline, like if we want to take this all as one package all at once, I don't know how we.
Well, I don't know if this is maybe a dumb suggestion or not, and I appreciate
no
this is
dumb
all one
suggestions.
package, but. I mean, is it possible to just go back to the current existing code, make the necessary updates we have to make to comply with law, submit that to the commission? Hopefully they approve it. And then later come back with our comprehensive new code that incorporates all the design standards and changes that we want to make at a later time, so we get what needs to be done by law first, and then we have more time to do the whole rewrite.
Is there too much missing? And I'm wondering about how the current is formatted compared to the reformatted version.
It's not
I mean,
good. We've already, I mean,
Yeah.
most of what's going on in this document is the necessary updates for content neutrality. We tried to adjust the variance issue with wall signage. We'll work with the local on-premise sign guys and come up with the correct number there. I'm confident we'll get there. But yeah, I would say that the off-premises sign question is looming, and it's not currently at a spot where there's a ton of room for negotiation. And in this work session, I would say, I don't know that you've established a ton of middle ground from getting rid of them altogether, or just adopting the current regulations as is.
We haven't had
I-
a chance to have that conversation yet.
Sure,
So-
sure. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that looks like, I guess, but never mind. I don't know.
I think that
Very long day.
our initial proposal that you all saw in the draft update was prohibit off-premises signs. Clearly, that is something that we need to have more conversation about. So the question is, what is the neutral ground? Is it just code as it exists now, or are there pieces or steps we could take that are somewhere in the middle between black and white? But I don't know. Maybe there aren't options in the
Would it help
middle.
if the sign community on our end went through the current code? And highlighted the changes we'd like to see them, current days, bring it up to date on what we propose would be the best.
For
solution.
off-premises, you're talking about?
Yeah, or like altogether.
Of
did
the
submit
current
something
code?
For the on-premise, with highlighted changes that we suggested. I'm not sure if you guys, I think that was one of the. One of the initial submissions for the last meeting.
Yeah. I also have a copy of that here.
Here, comment from Earl and the chambers as well.
I think we can, Earl, go ahead and unmute. You see your hands raised, so why don't you chime in?
Yeah, this is Earl Charles, Branded Sign Solutions. I just was wondering, what is the driving force behind wanting to ban billboards altogether? Now, I'm an on-premise guy, but still, I don't understand why or what's the driving force behind trying to get rid of them altogether?
Fair question. I can jump in and speak from my perspective. So I will be honest with you all, in the room. I know that there are several other communities in Montana that have banned billboards from their city limits. I think when we were looking at a sign code update, we specifically discussed, and it should be reflected in our minutes from work sessions prior, a desire to enhance the character, culture, the aesthetics of the city. And one of the things that the zoning commission talked about was the view shed in Montana and specifically in Helena, and the potential to open up some more of our big skies by not blocking them with billboards.
And I think there were some, of the public comments that kind of reflected that as well.
It's also one of those things where a lot of the public who aren't in the industry don't show up to meetings like this, that we hear them all the time when they hear we're on the everywhere we go. So it's kind of hard to represent two sides, but I think it's important to keep in mind as well, that balance. Yeah.
Does that help, Earl? Does that answer your question? Well, we can unmute you again.
Oh, okay. It answers my question, although it is somewhat confusing because I do think that there's maybe some middle ground that could be reached. And maybe you have some specific corridors where the billboards are allowed to stay and some others where you ban billboards altogether. And I think that is a healthy balance. I know that I specifically have a couple of different customers who have a revenue stream coming in from billboards. Number one, that advertise their business, but others who have billboards on their property that they get annual revenue from the billboard company to allow that to be there. That would be completely wiped out.
There's one more comment I did just think of that has come up in different zoning meetings as well. There was discussion very long ago about being able to see, particularly like digital, these large digital signs and billboards from clear across the valley at night, and how upsetting that has gotten over the years as different ones pop up. And so that was something else that I think was on our minds.
Well, and that kind of came up too in the discussion about, or peripherally came up in the discussion about the, what's the new gas station at the south?
The Maverick.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the comments
Right.
that came up during that one.
And I think the solution there is to limit how bright it is.
Yeah, lighting restrictions.
Yeah, sure. And then, like we're all saying, you know, especially in a lot of more urban areas where even if you take billboard down, you still have obstruction. It's not solving any of the problem in that specific area for pollution, for visibility of the sky. And a lot of the times, a billboard wouldn't be a great location where you can see all the sky. So I definitely think that zoning would be a good way to address that. Let's wipe them all out completely altogether. I don't think that's good. For
There also might be discussion opportunity about the overall size. I know, that was something I had brought up a while back as a potential alternative. Considering our restrictions on freestanding signs, we decided those are appropriate for freestanding signs. Is that appropriate if the message is simply off-site? For that, like a similar size, that would be okay in that area. I know with the safety report we got from Michael with our speed limits, I think it said something along the lines of 200 square feet would be adequate, but like our billboard size is minimum 250, which when we were looking at other cities was quite large for in town. I know other towns do have large billboards, but I mean, that might be part of the conversation. Perhaps it's overall size is part of the story as well.
And I think that's kind of the happy medium that you're kind of hoping to achieve through this is there are other cities that have already gone down this rabbit hole and done a lot of the heavy lifting for Helena if need be, size restrictions, light spillage if it's a digital unit, things like that. So that's where I think maybe further discussion definitely could be value added.
The 250 square foot is actually fairly interesting after talking with Lamar. They have two sign standards essentially in town. They have the highway sign standard, which is 300.
Actually, the MDOT will go up to 672.
What we have in town though.
Yeah,
We allow
I'm
up to
I'm just saying on highway regulated highways, state highways. Again, that's the restriction of the city limits, which would fall under your guys' rules and regulations. And it does say, so just for a quick example, like a billboard sign under the definition, it says a sign that is greater than 250 square feet is basically considered a billboard. So I guess a sign that is an off-premise sign that's under 200 or under 250 square feet. I guess what does that fall under? Does that still fall under a billboard or does it fall under a freestanding sign? It just says that anything over 250 is considered a billboard. Where all of our stuff in the city limits of Helena is 242 square feet. So and that's again, we don't have any in residential zoning. And I know a lot of people and every sign code in probably America starts out as we want to clarify, we want the Beautification Act, it's blocking the hills, it's blocking the mountain, this or that. Well, a 10 by 22 sign is not blocking that big of a mountain. I'm sorry, but and cosmetically, there's not enough billboard signs within the city that makes that big of a difference of a cosmetic impact until you start looking at like old telephone poles that are running down the streets. You got angled telephone poles, you got just a discombobulated mess of lines, you've got trees that are dead, you've got, look at there's houses that have look like junkyard. There's all sorts of cosmetic stuff. It's just, I think that signs in general get a bad rap. They've had a bad rap for 100 years. Everybody needs them. Businesses need them to advertise their businesses. Off-premise has been around we've got poles in the ground that have probably been 75, 50 years old, that they're just not going anywhere. We're open to different things, like if we want to bring them into conformance, bring the ones that have multiple poles into monopoles, let's work together and do that. Give us the timeline to be able to do that instead of just eliminating them. We want to work with you guys to make it cosmetically, we have to have our space in between residential. We can only be in industrial, we can only be in commercial. We're restricted already. And then the MDOT restricts us even more. So it's not like, and now as things grow, yeah, we might have a little bit more opportunity, but then again, it all also starts with the landowner. If they don't want to do it, we can't do it. That's where our whole conversation starts with. It's building relationships. And I mean, and there's also plenty of on-premise signs that are historically that are bigger. Heck, some of them, you know, in some cities are bigger than off-premise signs. But I think they need to, you know, some of the historical stuff needs to stay, and I think it's good for the community and they're icons of the community. So it's just, I think we just, and I don't think it's gonna take much. I think it's just kind of coming together and kind of tweaking and finding a few things and making it work for everyone.
I agree with you.
That in-town signage at 242, I thought was pretty interesting since. we
And that's
had
a
that
standard
200
industry size. They're what we call posters in our industry, so it's a very standard size across the country.
That it, right in our definition, it doesn't meet our definition as we had been doing, but we've been having that form factor in town for decades.
You guys confirm that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Billboards? Yeah.
it mentions like painted poster, paper, temporary material.
it's not a good definition.
But I'm just thinking about billboards around town, and we've had this conversation last month where it is hard to know how square footage of a sign when you look at it. So yes, they are all 242 square feet or less,
I didn't
all the
look at them. I
billboards.
asked Lamar how big their sign was, and they said it was 22 by 11, so
Okay.
242.
And it's,
10.6 by 22.9.
so if they
Sorry.
seem
No, it's
bigger,
okay, it's just the different size.
some seem bigger and smaller, it's probably just because they're closer to me and I'm driving slower.
Yeah.
If you notice, like around town, they all have kind of like, for Lamar anyway, we have a metal trim around the outside of those. That's what the industry is calls a poster. So that's the 10.6 by 22.9. It's super standard again across the country. Within the outdoor industry.
The square one, you might see a square one, they might be 12 by 24s, somewhere in that area, but we don't,
have any.
Lamar does not have any of those.
Yes,
but I mean, there are some that may be out there that are 12 by 24s. But again, that then again reflects on whether it's probably in the county, or it could be, again, if it's in the county, it's gonna be on a state regulated highway, so. Which then, if it's in the county, on a state regulated highway, you could have up to 672 square feet. So, I know a lot of cities monitor too, a lot of the 250 probably, would be my guess, come from other codes somewhere, because I know Billings says it's 250, or Billings, I think, even uses 300. Anything under, you know, that's our maximum in the city limits. So it's, I mean, obviously there's sign codes all over the board, there's numbers all over the board, it's just come to a happy medium.
And I think to your point, there are different sizes within the city limits. I know we've acquired a number of boards over the years through private owners.
Sure.
Pre any kind of regulations, so, yeah, I know we have quite a few boards of different sizes. Any kind of new builds, I mean, there is kind of a standard that we move forward with, which is similar to what you guys are talking about, but yeah, I mean, just for transparency, we do have boards of different sizes within the limits. So I think this all kind of reinforces the need to have two separate meetings.
Although I will say though, when we start talking about the gray area, when we're looking at where should this type of sign be located, whether there are size restrictions, whether there are light restrictions, those are the same topics that we're going to be talking with the on-premises folks about. It's just whether they're off-premise or on-premise, they're the same topics.
There's
the same
definitely gonna be
conversations.
crossover,
Yeah,
right?
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
I understand that the way it seems like you guys operate is you have sort of two separate sides of the house, so I get that. It doesn't make sense for half of you to sit in the room when we're talking about on-premise and same for off-premise.
I think for like lay people, a lot of the kind of emotional reactions are similar when talking about signs and some of the, you know, kind of triggering elements, I suppose, when we end up coming up and hearing things. And so trying to figure out that medium ground might have similar areas in some of these spaces, or similar conversations at least.
Is this the existing code?
Yes.
Billboards?
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful. Also just on another perspective, just to pull the perspective out to like 30,000 feet. You know, B2 in some of our zone types are pretty car oriented. It's car oriented infrastructure. The buildings aren't up on the property line. That's why they have freestanding signs out front. They're designed around moving at inhuman speeds and reading and readability of large things. The zoning commission in a lot of places is trying to have more pedestrians, bring buildings out to the street. I think thinking in terms of where you want it to function well for cars and what that means for the person, the driver, and thinking about your pedestrian areas and what that scale means in those areas and maintaining that perspective instead of maybe getting lost in the weeds on some of this stuff. I would just encourage that.
I think Helena is unique in that we have essentially this state highway that runs right through. And so I think a lot of the comments that we have heard and some of the ones that have been submitted through the comment portal that you've shared, Michael, reflect that fact that as people get closer into the city, even if they're trying to pass through on Highway 12, there is this feeling that there are a lot of big signs welcoming people into town that maybe should be reducing in scale, even though we have the same zone, right? There's the same zoning district for that whole stretch. So that's prior to our sign conversation, the zoning commission had started conversations about entryway corridors and how we would look at maybe overlay zones or different requirements along those corridors. So that conversation might help get at some of this, where we could have different sign standards as you get closer into the city, so that there's a general feeling of when we've moved from car oriented to more of a welcoming pedestrian.
This is
center.
this is the urban core area or something like that. So that's been a regular thread, I would say, in zoning commission meetings in my time with the city, is that tension about, well, sorry, I'm just repeating it.
No, that's okay.
I can give you a quick example of what Billings does, for example. They have a moratorium. And anything that we take down in the city limits, they could give it a sign credit, for example. So if we take one face down, they give us a sign credit for one face to be able to relocate it in a legal conforming location within the city. But obviously it has to be a conforming location. So instead of just, if say, for example, somebody builds a building, we have to remove the sign. If it's in one of the city limits somewhere, they basically, the city of Helena, they give us a credit, whether it's one face or two faces, depending on what the sign is. And then with that credit, we were able to use those two faces or one face and put it in a legal conforming location per the city.
Which would be like a commercial or.
Industrial, whatever that,
It's like a residential area where they sell.
and sometimes, it may not be used for 15 years, just due to the fact that growth, changing of zoning, stuff like that. I mean, that's just what they do. It's a way of being able to, I guess, control it if that's what you guys are looking at doing. But at the same time, being fair to where at least we have the opportunity to continue to grow if the option is there. So if there are no sign credits and there is a moratorium, we basically have to remove one to build one. To kind of weigh it out to where you're not gonna get any more unless we start taking some, take one down type thing in the city limit. That's just an example of what Billings does, for example. Just to kind of give you an idea of what direction we could possibly go if we had to. But I think, even like in this letter here under H, where off-premise signs, including billboard signs, must be removed after 10 years. I just think that's
On its face.
ridiculous. I just realistically, I don't think the city even wants to go up against that battle, honestly. I think there's, not necessarily the city, but the taxpayers and everything else. I think it's gonna be extremely costly.
Does anyone have experience doing that through the Missoula process?
So I can tell you, so Great Falls tried to do that. And I've been in the industry for 18 years. They did try to do that, they did adopt it. I don't know if it still said that in today's, but it doesn't. So they must have taken it out, because they tried to do the same thing. And after that 10 years, it didn't even exist. They didn't even, I think they knew what battle they were gonna end up having. Mainly because a lot of the signs anymore could be easements, they could be property that's owned by the sign company. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it, and then just to be able to eliminate them altogether. I just think that you end up buying the ground, get the sanders on, you end up, there's a lot of variables that are gonna take place. That I don't think the city is, I don't think they need to, I don't think they'll want to, other than just, like I said, the moratorium example or something like that, a different route. Would be more beneficial.
And I'm not even aware of any city in the nation that's uprooted billboards altogether.
No, I have not, no.
Moratorium, absolutely, but actually having them removed, I mean, the cost would be astronomical.
Oh, yeah.
For taxpayers that incur
So that,
to do that.
that part of the concern, not that this is proposing no new billboards, but that it's actually proposing that you have to go in and remove them.
I'm sorry?
Is part of your concern, not that this is just saying no new billboards or no new off premises, but that it's requiring you to go in and remove them?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
key focus, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, not allowing new, we're seeing more and more of that. Particularly in the larger, more developed cities, Bozeman, Billings.
Yeah.
Missoula, so that's not an uncommon language, but to actually remove them, that'd be a challenging use of taxpayer dollars to occur that.
I wonder, from my perspective, and I don't know where we are in terms of trying to have another meeting to follow up on this, but if we were to have another meeting, it would be helpful to me if the industry folks, and I think the YESCO that had submitted initially a kind of red line with comments, version of this.
It was.
Or Lamar, okay. So I'm wondering if it would be helpful to have them submit not just kind of comments on it, but their suggested language, or striking out of language you don't like, both to the new proposed one and to the existing billboard one.
We could certainly do that and have our legal team kind of put in exact language of what we would suggest.
But it also sounds to me like they like it how it is.
Well,
Right. Right.
Well, we
it's-
certainly would love to see it, the current regulations adopted and stay the same, absolutely. We would like to see that, but we can certainly, if we had to meet in the middle and middle ground, we're, willing to have conversations on that, but I think it's looking at exactly how that needs to be laid out, honestly, on a legal side of things, on how it legally needs to be written into an ordinance. And
I think just even in here, it's been touched on, like for the digital signs, for example, just so it states in there that they need to be on a dimmer. They come with it anyway. We know that. I mean, standard. It's just the standard industry, but as long as it's actually in there, so people can read the book and say, oh my gosh, it doesn't say anything in here about illumination, and they can just turn it up as bright as they want because it doesn't say anything. I mean, there's always gonna be these little gray cracks that people are gonna dig into and find and keep prying, and pretty soon the crack is, 2 feet wide, because they're just prying on things that are just ridiculous. But I think just by fine tuning some of that language and the illumination and the digitals and this is the off premise, this is the on premise, illumination digitals, just so everybody's all on the same page. Cause it is the new wave and it is the new technology, and granted, the off premise and on premise get the same businesses. I mean, we get the watch fires and the Daktronics and the Firewatch, whatever. I mean, they're all used the same, so they're all basically the same interior, the same guts. It's just bigger sign, I mean, just a bigger scale is all.
And it certainly is the wave of the future and something, you know, I'm sure both the on and off premise would like to see more of, but it's by taking what we currently have and converting it. We're not asking to put in a bunch more. I mean, we'd love to if you allow us, but we understand that, you know, maybe we have a wooden pole that we'd love to see become a steel monopole, single pole structure that we can update, and allowing us to have discussions with you on this, maybe could potentially have that conversation where, you know, we might have a wooden structure. Let us update that. Let us, as Kelly mentioned previously, like that is something we would be willing as a company to invest in and put the bill on to update our current structures. So they would be more uniform across the city.
Things that they would probably not be interested in are also like cap and replace programs where we're not asking them to remove anything, but we are asking them to, you know, keep an active license on them. And then there's a financial return to the city, if you want to, call it, or look for a public benefit, beyond, the message that they bring outwards or things like that. And the city, you know, can prepare examples of that type of program as well.
Is there another, you kind of mentioned this is your poster size, right? Is there a notch down that standard?
Sure, I mean, there's different sizes, there's different structures, but the industry, there's generally 3 industry standards, and the poster, as we talked about, is about 242 square feet, I think off the top of my head. And then there's what we call a 10-6-36, which is going to be, without doing the math, I think 376 square feet. And then there's a 1448, which would be 672. So let me just double check, because I want to give you the exact. Yeah, so the 10-6-36 and 1448 are industry standards as well. The 10-6 is the 378 and 1448 is the 672, but they are more on interstate, they're more on highways, they're more, you know, we do have one in town. Now that we are talking about it, our digital bulletin here in town is a 10-6 unit, so it's 378 square feet.
And where's that?
That's the eliminated one on I-15.
Oh, okay.
And we actually have worked with the city, since there was a complaint, and we have been that board 30% since we put it up to be partners with the city and to work with the city. When we installed it, it was snowing that day. Weird, hopefully not snowing yet now, but it was snowing that day. So, you know, we tried to adjust the brightness the best we could in the moment, but it was hard with the snow. But we did, like I said, we have dimmed it 30% since we put it up, over 30%. So we're willing to work and certainly be partners with the city and find a way to work through it.
Yeah, and even on the digital front, there's guards, like light guards that could be, you know, installed to help with spillage and things like that. I mean.
But those have to be put, not to interrupt.
Yeah.
Those have to be put on when you install the billboard. You can't, it's the way the structure is built, the way the digital sign is built. So it has to be ordered that way. It has to be built that way by our suppliers. It's not something we can just put on.
Right. The cost would be astronomical to replace.
Yeah, not to interrupt. I just wanted to reiterate.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. But the point being, I mean, I think there's things that we can kind of provide as far as recommendations that's worked with other agencies. And even on that note, I welcome you guys to reach out to the Billings and the Bozeman's and the Great Falls and other agencies that have already gone through this process just to prevent kind of having to reinvent the wheel.
And just like back where you had said, if there's any industry standards, the reason why there's so many different sizes of structures is the hodgepodge of different sizes. As Bob had mentioned, some companies go out of business, some mom and pop stuff, so there's different sizes, so we did have a ton of them, Lamar, and then we invested into all these junior, they're called posters, so that's why all of ours look the same now. We try to adopt those, and as we acquire different signs, we'll put poster faces on them just so they all kind of look uniform and they all look the same. But that's the main reason. I don't know if there's really an industry standard as far as a smaller in town, smaller out town. I think that's all basically based off of square footage, honestly.
Whatever the town regs are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we do have a hand raised online, Earl, and then I want to make sure that we have some time to talk through some of the concerns expressed by the on-premise folks. Since you all are here, we would like to hear from you. And Earl, go ahead.
Yeah, Earl Charles again, Brandon Sign Solutions, and something that hasn't been mentioned yet, I think is probably important for the conversation. Some may disagree, but I honestly think that there's a couple of other factors that we should look at, and that is, as a business owner, I choose the way I want to advertise my business. And the reality is the majority of these boards are full because people want to advertise their business that way. Now, there are other ways to advertise. I can buy TV, I can buy radio. Well, I can buy billboard space. If you decide to eliminate them, then you've just helped my competition, both radio and TV, and eliminated my revenue source. And I just think that that's another avenue that we need to be looking at when we consider banning billboards. I'm really concerned about banning them altogether.
Yeah, thank you. Good points. Okay. Can we talk about wall sign size? Not just on premise, but literally on the building. I know that we've heard 24 square feet as a floor is too small, especially for, it sounds like some of the strip mall locations. Is 60 square feet what I'm hearing would be more appropriate? And then what is the appropriate percentage in your minds? I know that that's a tough question, but.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be a hard thing to kind of go through. And it might be something that we have to, as an industry, go around town and kind of go to this shopping mall and say, is this sign reasonable? Is it too small?
Okay.
You know, and kind of come up with a number and give it to Michael.
It's different in every different, depending on where the location is of the building setting back, the size of the building, the amount of tenants in that building. So.
And one thing I do want to make sure gets addressed here is once I put in the sign program, and that requirement, the shopping centers and that kind of question really gets sort of resolved when there's some leeway for just the city to sit down and work with the sign companies to make sure that even though the frontages, the widths of the different businesses, the facades inside those shopping centers might vary, they get to have a uniform and good looking sign package that sort of works for the center on the whole. And I just think there hadn't really been enough flexibility in the existing code or this code, and I think this really just would allow for some leeway, just to, even if this wording needs some massaging, but I think it resolves many of the issues that I've heard so far expressed, at least for the larger facilities.
The big facilities, it definitely does. Another thing that I just thought about too is like, maybe if you have a 4-sided building, you're allotted the 3%. If you have a 3-sided building, you're allotted 4%. If you have a 2-sided building, you're allotted 5%. And if you have a single-sided, like you're back to back with somebody, you're allotted 6%. I don't know if there's something in a grading scale on the sides of buildings that could affect that and be fair to everybody. I don't know a good way to term that, but it'd be something to think about.
And as Bob was saying earlier too, that it, kind of, it varies with how far away you were, the public is viewing that section. So I mean, a 5 by 10 seems really huge when it's in your lobby, but when it's 1,000 feet out, you can binoculars to see it, I almost wonder if there's another ordinance out there that takes that into consideration where there's a ratio. like a percentage per, in comparison to how far the intended viewing distance is from public roadways and right of ways. Yeah, it's.
Can I ask? This is specifically directed to you then, because it's one that I worked with you on and we had to do the variance for. Benefits, those signs, are those big enough in your opinion, then based on this?
Up high one.
Yes,
I think for that application, I think they're adequate.
okay, I mean, just
Do I-
trying to get a
would I-
frame of
do I
reference
think they could
in
go
my mind.
bigger? I think they could go bigger.
But do you think those are adequately sized for that
For what they
building
designed,
in that?
what they designed, what they decided was adequate in the architect plans is, ultimately, that's wrong.
Mhm.
I personally like them. I think they're modest in size. So,
Do you remember what percentage?
They came in, I thought, at like 2.5.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they came in lower than 3.
I think they were smidge more than that.
But it's,
Somewhere between there, but under 3. I
Yeah,
know.
under 3.
Yeah.
mhm.
So are there standards where it's different percent for how high it is placed on the building?
I mean, so I'm gonna draw on variances we've granted, when the back of a building is facing I-15. There's various CUPs that address that or variances that have addressed that to allow for more signage, bigger, because it needs to be viewed by essentially an on-premise billboard. But so it's not necessarily, I mean, that's definitely a viewing distance and speed kind of equation that they were pulling there and saying, we don't have nearly enough signage. So, yeah, I mean, it's really not just the size of the facade. I mean, that's accurate. I think for those bigger facilities, which again is why I'm hoping we can get some sort of sign program language in there to have some flexibility to just work with those types of things. The smaller buildings tend to have less setback issues. They're just, if it's a smaller building, it's generally on a smaller lot. That's not always the case.
More times than not, though.
But more times than not, they're closer, so we do need to get that number dialed in.
Yeah.
With them in mind, and then maybe some flexibility on just the bigger end.
So I just have a lot of questions that I'm hoping that if you don't have guidance for us tonight, you could maybe jot these down and provide us with some guidance. So one is on the sizing that is appropriate for wall signs. It sounds like 60 square feet as the floor is what you would like, so we can discuss that as a zoning commission. The percentage of facade sounds like it's still up in the air, so we'd like some more guidance on that. Other questions that I jotted down, it sounds like there is interest in a different treatment of electric messaging centers. So time between display changes and then the animation question. So 7.5 seconds sounds like what is in current code. And if that is where everybody wants to fall for the actual display changes, 7.5 seconds. I think zoning commission, if I understood some of the nods and comments earlier, agree that 8 minutes maybe is a long time for that type of sign. So I think we're open to discussing something that is much shorter than that. And then any existing language or language suggestion around the use of animation, but not pulsating, scintillating, just for like text appearing or scrolling on a sign. I think we interested in seeing what that would look like.
Yeah.
So we're not just switching back to anything goes in terms of animation.
Motorcycles. That one got me the other day.
Let's see. Another question I think that we can talk about is the flashing bulbs on signs. It sounds like there are a handful within Helena, so maybe that's a situation where we look at the brightness of bulbs, understanding that if these are old timey signs, bulbs were much dimmer back then than you could install now. So there's a big difference there.
I think you could aggregate that and just adjust the language of the ghost sign to include vintage signs. I think that would be an easy way to just kind of kill two birds with one stone.
Or tie into the flashing signs and add an illumination standard for allowance of flashing signs, like flashing signs aren't to exceed X amount of brightness. Because they really are not that bright at all. They're just kind of there.
I'm hopeful somebody, or I will just try to find on my own, that Salt Lake City. Or signs, the vintage sign ordinance.
We can get that.
I would guess from James, I think James Carpentier mentioned it, he'll probably send it to you.
Okay.
Would be my guesstimate.
Yeah, I'd love to present that language to you guys.
Is there anything about frequency that we,
Like how quickly they can flash. I'm thinking of like, I think it's the last chance casino one that goes around. So,
yeah,
They just kind of alternate.
okay. Yeah, so you're wondering if there's a
speed concern?
limit on that?
Yeah.
No, I've never really dealt with one, but I kind of understand how they work. It's, I don't know, modern technology wise, he's probably the one to ask, but there's just a rotary dial. It's a little motor that spins a dial that has contacts. As it touches that contact, it sends the power through.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't know if that's still how the modern,
They're digital now too.
yeah.
And you can speed it up, so it just runs.
Now, you can set them at different speeds or there's a lot of different.
Fast and slow.
Okay,
So,
there are options there.
There are,
in terms
yes.
of speed. Okay.
and the other thing I noticed is that, of the comments, that was Lamar, looks like you incorporated and made most of those changes in this draft,
Yeah, and I guess I'm hoping I can leave here with some direction from zoning commission, about whether or not any of this language should be adopted in a proper draft, and refined a bit and looked at by legal and brought back to you either for another work session or otherwise. We did leave the last session where with me feeling a little uneasy about what I was actually supposed to do with all of this information for you all.
Understood. So I have two more general just comments for additional feedback and as you put together your thoughts. One on just looking at the tables where signs are permitted, not permitted in different districts. We would love your input on whether that's appropriate. And then also in terms of the actual square footage and height of different types of signs in districts, that would be really helpful to know from you as well. Basically going from what is in the memo, the staff memo, that was provided in tonight's materials. Are those measurements in there appropriate, or are there changes you would like to see?
And you like the red line and yellow version that we've submitted? Okay, just so I can know and we'll do it again. Make
Red line
life
is super
easier.
helpful,
Really
because then we can
helps.
see.
Exactly, it stands out in pops, I think it's easier to see. Happy to do it.
And I want to recognize Earl again, has his hand raised online. Go ahead, Earl.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to a couple of things. One was the chasing bulbs. The controllers today, we still have the mechanical ones, but most of them are digital. They can be slowed down. But the other thing is the bulb brightness. The standard in the industry has been for years and still is 11 watts. So they're not very bright. They might seem a little brighter because of the color. A lot of times they're using more of a 6500 Kelvin in some of the newer LED ones, but it is 11 watts or equivalent to 11-watt bulb. So they're not that bright. And I just wanted to leave you with that information because they really aren't. And I would agree with what James Carpentier said, and that is if we could adopt something that would allow signs that have some historic value to stay. You know, I'm thinking about Dax Citraro's sign at the Village Inn, but also his down on the Walking Mall, the Rialto. Obviously, that's a very vintage sign that's been around for a very, very long time. And it would be a shame to have to lose that. Not that any of what you're doing would cause them to lose that. I'm just saying the idea of being able to keep the vintage signs, I think, is valuable to the city.
In a weird way to piggyback off that, we may want to think about this code in a slightly different light where we're sort of encouraging more stylistic signs. There's a code in Breckenridge, Colorado that was suggested to me where companies are allowed larger signs if they are doing essentially something that's like has like three-dimensional elements, or I forget the multi-dimensional in sort of their display. Essentially, if somebody is willing to be more creative, we would give them more space to have a bigger sign, and then we encourage a more unique flavor of signage in town, as opposed to just cornering people into a dreary box, potentially.
My thought on that is I think Helena is pretty sign forward with our sizes right now, is my personal opinion. So I'm not sure about larger. I think unique would be neat. There could be some interest there, but that's my personal opinion, at least in specific corridors. As we've discussed with the interest in scaling down. So I'm curious how we would be able to speak up, sorry. How we could kind of incentivize that sort of flair without also unintentionally kind of going other directions where we don't really want to go.
There might be other opportunities to sort of address it on that level as well, where this sign code is our base layer, but as we incorporate more neighborhood plans or even the creation of sign districts, which was an early idea with this sign code that I simply thought was too ambitious for the project. But perhaps incorporating sign districts here and there as we move forward and bringing in specific elements that or specific asks in different areas to create a flavor for those areas is something to visit in the future, but making sure that we get a baseline for the city currently that works.
Okay.
So
Did you want to jump in?
The only thing I was gonna say is to add to that is the incentive to do something more aesthetic, which makes it look more like it's part of the architecture, basically.
Right.
Instead of just having your square blocks
Right.
smacked up on the wall face.
Okay, so I would like to not leave you tonight with a feeling that you don't have direction. So can we go through this city's memo?
Have we concluded a discussion on electronic? Are we gonna go through one line and come back to it then?
Go for it.
Okay,
Yeah, I didn't, if
I'm
you have,
having a little
if zoning commissioners have more,
certain about our order of
Yeah.
operations
I think we.
with public, because we have so much public comment. The separation of our work session and our comment taking has been a little difficult.
Sure.
I personally still think, I think the decrease to 7.5 seconds makes sense. I think that sounds fine, but for me, that is more with the idea that the messages are fairly static. That's how I'm feeling. I'm interested to hear how everyone else is feeling about that. I'm okay with like scrolling text, but a lot of what I've been hearing about is like the the very excitable animations that have been popping up, and if it were just one, I don't think anybody would notice or care so much, but when you're coming down, Prospect or going up 11th, and you're looking down the whole street, and it's just dancing with different things going on, it can be kind of difficult to handle for some folks. So that's my personal feeling on that subject matter. If we could try to come up with something that would kind of get a middle ground there, I would like that. Thoughts?
No, I would agree with that too, because I think certain animated signs around town are absolutely obnoxious. Just a few that I can recall off the top of my head, but I don't know how we can write language in the code that gets at that, but
Yeah.
still. I'm not really sure what kind of language that would be, so it'd be helpful to have feedback on that too, to get at.
It's tough to monitor, and this is just my opinion, it's tough to monitor, and you guys might be able to chime in too, but it's tough, I mean, they obviously install it. But ultimately, they don't control it.
Right.
So it's the land, it's the business owner that's gonna be like,
Oh, this will be
let's
fun.
see, let's crank it up a little
Yeah.
bit just to see what I can get away with. Now, again, that falls back to what Michael said earlier, there is no, I'm gonna call them sign cops, there is nobody that monitors that. And goes out and says, hey, you gotta turn that down, calm it down a little bit,
Mhm.
and then they'll do that, cause I know that's what they try to do it back in Billings. And then 2 days later, they come back and I'm cranking her back up again until they come back, cause all they get my little hand stuff.
Mhm.
You know, it's tough. It's one of those things that they push the envelope, I think, a little bit too far, and I think that's what it kind of hinders and it scares everybody.
Mhm.
Because it scares you guys as decision makers, it scares the city because they want to try to control it to a certain point. But at the same, I mean, I don't even know if there's a right or wrong way to do it. It's one of those impossible things to try to control. It's just hoping that they do it correctly and be fair with everybody, because it gives us a bad name too, because they're like, oh my gosh, now they're gonna be able to do it at a bigger scale. And then now we get restricted even more, and these guys are the ones that are kind of doing, they're the installers, they're not the blamers, obviously.
Right.
It's the person behind the computer cranking it up and stuff.
And I hear you all as sign professionals, I wouldn't make a sign like that, like I hear you.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
we wanna work with you, I mean, it's our industry and their industry
mhm.
to erect them, and it's how we
Yeah.
make a living and put food on the table and pay
Mhm.
bills. It's the other people that are kind of restricting
Right.
us to, see what we can get away with this, type thing, other than, just kind of get it monitored.
But if we can allow, scrolling text would allow for like the smaller electronic display faces to get messages across.
Sure, absolutely.
Not allowing additional things going on.
But
Could we restrict it that way and we don't have to get too far into exactly what other thing, how much of other things are allowed? Is that something we could?
Well, I think it's probably safe to say that the city isn't going to regulate tastefulness or anything like that. I mean, at the end of the day, once these signs
Right.
are up, if they're allowed to animate, we're
So that's what
probably
I'm
only
saying.
gonna get involved if it's causing a problem that could hurt somebody.
Right,
Or,
so no animation, scrolling text or symbol only, because we can't probably say, can't put a circle or a square or
Well,
a static flag image that rolls, right?
well, what I'm saying is it's probably harder to get a sign cop in over that than it is if somebody is just suddenly hitting you with like a bright flashing light on the sign or something like that. Even if we had such a position, just to talk about it as having worked in this town and what we're gonna end up enforcing. If animation isn't allowed and somebody complains about it, we will go out there and do an investigation, and 2 months later, they will have agreed to stop doing that. If it's a health and safety issue, we can go in much quicker.
Right.
And do something. So just it's whether or not, you're asking the city to sort of be nitpicky on that issue.
I'm trying to figure out if there's a clear line we can draw that does not allow things that are not just type messages.
I think that's where you guys are hearing us saying no to certain things, right? It seems very black and white when
Right.
there may be very tasteful ways to do it,
Right.
but it requires really, I mean, potentially a lot of additional city staff
Yeah.
and assigned cop department to enforce.
Well, and I don't know that if it's that big of, I don't know that if it's that big of a deal until the major color, the red, the blues and the white start flashing, because then they indicate street lights, they indicate cop cars, siren, stuff like that. Because the people are gonna see a red and blue light flashing around, the first thing they're gonna see is a cop, you know what I mean? So it's, does that cause them to stop, to let them go? Who knows? It's just hard to, and I'm sure that they're really good about doing it. It's the brightness and stuff like that. And like you said, at night, it's gonna look a lot brighter than it because of the automatic dimmers. But I think a lot of the on-premise stuff gets a bad rap because of the flashing of the stop signs or something like that. I think that's where the biggest issue.
Speaking for myself, a lot of it is the moving like video animation. I have a really hard time driving when there's a video playing at me.
Sure.
And they'll, oh, I made a cute little car and it's driving around. That's
Yeah.
fun. And it's getting around. It has often nothing to do with their message. It's just kind of fun. Probably just having a good time. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to navigate traffic and
Sure.
I don't know how much the safety report has gone into actual videos playing versus typeface, I don't know, but I personally know I have a very difficult time with it. And it's one thing when it's one sign, okay, I know this one's there, but then when there's another one and they're on both sides of the street when you're going down that one way. I personally have a really hard time with that.
Sure.
And I've heard that from others as well. And I also think they get overwhelming as these signs become more popular, it will become more and more of a problem. As you all get hopefully good business, right? So I think personally, that's my feeling. It's not that there is a message going that says, hey, sale today, come on in, pumpkin spice latte. It's the extra.
Sure.
So if there's a way we can try to navigate that is a possible middle ground in which we can allow people to say pumpkin spice latte today, but not show me a video of somebody pouring a pumpkin spice latte all over a dog or something. That is what I'm looking for.
So if we could define.
I believe Jeff Young kind of did explain that and define it very well. I can't remember his exact verbiage, but he defined
Scintillating
it
or
extremely well.
pulsating, yeah. Mhm.
Animation, not so it's animation distinguished from pulsation or scintillation. And scintillation is, used it a couple times, so he meant it, but it's worth digging in and seeing how that word would legally parse out.
My concern is that some of these are words that probably make a lot of sense to folks in the sign industry, but the folks who are gonna be required to comply are the business owners. And they have no idea what that means, probably.
And there's not so many of them in Helena that we can't send an email to our customers explaining the definitions of what they're supposed to be doing with their sign.
Okay.
Yeah, and somebody, it's been requested of city staff that whatever we adopt at the end, we roll out user guides. Perhaps by zone type or what have you, just super simple versions of it where people can just pick out the part that's going to be applicable to them. And I don't want to promise that we'll do that, but we hear that, and I will run that up the chain.
I think another, I'm just gonna have a epiphany pertaining kind of like those feather flags, where if we're not allowed to professionally construct and install them, they're gonna go for a lesser product they're gonna completely control. They're not gonna have any idea about how it's supposed to be set up, what content would be appropriate, what isn't, and then you're also gonna have those signs diminishing. Is like they're not reliable as professional grade, especially if they're not installed properly, and they're gonna be controlling and doing crazy pouring pumpkin spice on the dog animations all the time.
That's another area that it seems like it's easier for the city to enforce just a you
Yes
know,
and
you
no.
can't have them. And then there's no gray area, of, is this one professionally installed, or did they buy it online and just stick it up themselves? So that's a tough one for, tough one for me
It
to
is.
get behind.
It's hard.
I think we have some challenges in the city just with the level of capacity for enforcement. And I think some of that is feeding into this conversation where there are some strong opinions about signs and what's appropriate and what's not, and some of them are not even legal right now, but
Yeah.
there they are out there driving this conversation. Because I'm sorry, guys, you just don't have enough people.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily just capacity either. It's also been will, you know, it has not been in the interest of many city commissions and my understanding of the past before I got here to be heavy-handed with local businesses. It's just hasn't interested many city commissions, so.
I also think public awareness would be something to focus on too, where you can have enforcement from, you know, the citizens and the community. Where, I mean, how many people don't know that there are even restrictions on signage? I mean, I bet the majority of the public has no idea that there's even a sign code, what you're allowed and what you're not allowed. But I think if you know, we can help on that end too, just some education, you know. There's, get word out, like, hey, there is something you can do about this. It's just distracting, you feel like it's a hazard, you can report this, and there are guidelines that have to be followed.
Earl, I see your hands raised. Do you want us to leave him unmuted? You can actually probably unmute everybody.
Yeah, this is Earl again. As the old guy here, let me just give you a couple of quick stories because I think it's important. When the very first full color display was Rock Hand Hard.
I'm trying to change.
Oops. Earl, we lost you for a minute there.
No,
I'm sorry, I tried to change you so you wouldn't have to raise your hand every time.
Okay. So anyway, here's the deal. As the old guy here, when Rockhand Hardware first put the very first full color unit up, they did a bunch of red and blue flashing lights on it. And there were people having issues with it. But you know who policed it? It wasn't the city. It was the sign people. We went over there and we convinced them to back off of that because it was going to cause problems. The same thing happened with the mother load. They bought a cheap Chinese thing that they couldn't figure out how to dim, and it was blinding people on Cedar Street for the first several months that they had it. And I know of at least 6 different sign people that went in there and begged them, please. And I actually went in there and said, let me get on there and do it for you, but it's got to be dimmed down or you're going to cause us issues. And so I do think we do police this. I do think that there's language that can be put in about scintillating and flashing and things of that nature that will allow the nice animated transitions and the nice animated graphics without getting people really riled up and distracted and things of that nature. So I just want you to know that the sign professionals that are in the room there and here, we do care about the way they look. We do care about how they use them. And we don't want them just going out there and getting crazy with them and doing all kinds of flashing. And I've had at least 2 customers that I sold colored message centers to that I went in within about 2 weeks and said, please stop doing the flashing. In fact, you ought to get rid of that particular tool altogether. Never flash ever. We don't flash. That's one of the things we don't do because it gets people riled up and gets them upset and gets them complaining. And we don't need that. because they are a good tool. They can be used properly. And when they are used properly, they are effective. I know of at least 2 businesses, one of which is a very large company here in the state. And they've done studies on locations with the proper messages and what it's done for their business. We're talking upwards of 20 to 25% increase in business after they've installed one and used it properly. That's significant. And that would be a huge hit if they had to give that up.
It's approaching 9. I wonder if we can do a process here.
Yeah. Can we go through the draft?
Yeah.
That might be provided for tonight, so we can give them some direction on, yes, incorporate and update the draft, official draft or not. I think we can start with the edits, additions on the first page. So anyone have, I guess it's second page, so like first page of real code. Anyone have issues? Zoning commission would be their place.
No.
Changes, okay, we're good.
Sorry.
Page 2,
Page
you're
2,
good.
great.
Page 3. Let's go the couple additions prior to the sign program. Any issues with those 2 paragraphs being amended? That's related to maintenance and timeframes. Are these?
I don't.
Changes up from?
Yeah, a lot of feedback saying that 10 days was completely unrealistic. Basically 60 days, start to finish, and,
so these changes
or
from
to
10,
offer a plan or prove to the site administrator that they are handling the issue.
so these changes from 10 to 60, for instance, are taking input from the
Yeah.
sign folks. Okay,
Yeah,
okay. That all looks good to me.
I'm fine with that too. Can we skip over the sign program for now and get to the simpler changes and then we can get to it? Any issues with the changes on pages 5 or 6?
There's some changes on 4 as well.
So the striking of the aggregation of signs, I understand, is replaced by the sign program.
Yep.
So, yeah, so let's skip that. In I, where it instead of
We strongly oppose that.
strongly oppose it as amended to just be billboards, or strongly oppose it as previously written where it's off premises signs, including billboards.
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Yeah.
The removal of any off-premise or billboard signs, we strongly oppose.
Yeah.
As an industry.
I think we heard that tonight, so, yeah.
I will think of that.
In terms of direction to you for an updated draft, can we highlight that paragraph in its entirety as a, yes, as an area where more conversation is needed, especially around the
Options.
yeah.
Yeah, because
different
I heard
options.
options earlier,
Yeah.
like, certain corridors, they'd be fine. Certain zones, they'd be fine.
Sizes, moratoriums.
So I think there needs to be some more flesh there.
and
Do you want us to provide you with some examples to
Sure.
send to Michael, or, because I know I made the note of just, you wanted us to kind of go through and redline and make changes to what we suggested as well as going through this tonight. Do you want us to send that directly to Michael and he'll distribute it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're doing what you guys need.
And if you guys are looking for me to provide options as well, or things like that, what those options are, something from you, but also what types of alternatives you're looking at, I don't
Well,
know.
it sounds like one might be just no new billboards. One might be the swap idea, no additional, but you could scoot it along somewhere else if you wanted to take one down. Moratorium. My scoot idea. And then, another option might just be smaller sizes, other restrictions still apply as is. So still no,
But, and you also just want to see an incorporation, an as is as like a baseline? Like the current code
Mhm.
written in, and then options. Other
I
options
think,
to
yeah,
compare
there's a
them to.
spectrum. It seems like
Right.
there's this
I-
on one end,
I-
current code at the other
I'm
end.
wondering if it's, you need me to write 3 options or 5 options and just how I'm splitting up a week.
It seems to me that if we highlight that area and you incorporate into it some of the things we've heard tonight. And at the next meeting, we have the additional input from the industry. Then we'll be better able to kind of narrow it down, I don't think.
is that all you need?
Yeah, I'm largely gonna steal other city sign codes,
There you go.
so we'll
Go for it.
figure it out.
Okay,
Okay, then moving on to pages 5 and 6.
Michael raised a good issue of the fact that billboard is already defined. The poster size of billboard doesn't even fit in the billboard definition, so
Mhm.
we may wanna tweak that billboard sign definition.
And then I just had written a comment about the safety document indicating that with the speeds in town, there shouldn't really be a need for anything larger than 200 square feet. That was just an observation.
We can provide some industry standard information as well from the OAAA, which is the regulations we follow across the country as well.
Anything on directional to incidental? I'm good with that language.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Moving on to page 7. Definition of on-premise sign. I think it makes sense since we define off-premise sign.
Right.
Any issues with the pole banner signs? So I guess I do have a question on that. If the idea is that potentially they would be either exempt or just permitted everywhere. Are they typically always installed on city or Northwestern Energy, or like, how does, where do they get installed and who controls that?
Yeah, I guess, so I think it's Lithia, they have full banner signs on their parking lot lamps.
Okay. Yeah.
And I guess it's, you know, is that a problem?
Who
Kind of
does?
Question. I mean, Lithia has
Oh,
lots of
Lithia,
sign
yeah.
issues in general, but like,
Coulter has some, Carroll has flags.
Yeah.
Both of them are actually owned by the city.
so.
City.
So if they're on a public street, you know, obviously it's Northwestern or the city. If it's significantly internal, our sign code won't apply. It's really that gray area of somebody's parking lot lights, light poles that are near a city street, and whether or not you guys have an issue with those, or because otherwise, I think I don't think it's,
I'm fine leaving it for now.
would you prefer added to the exempt section then, or something like that, or somewhere to put it elsewhere?
I think so. I mean, if it's agreed that they're exempt.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
then-
sandwich board sign typo, the area.
Oh, yeah. That's one of those ones. And is everyone okay with that addition? Calculated on one side only?
Sure. Does that belong in the definition or does that belong near where we tell them how much signage they get?
So I was wondering if, so this goes to a different question of whether or not sandwich board signs should just be handled as in the, under temporary signage. In which case I'd be removing them from the design standard section. Which is why I sort of threw a size requirement into the definition, or just a way of defining their size in the definition. I think it was sort of always intended that you were only considering their size on one side. They're only,
Yeah.
they can only be read at one side of it.
Are you asking for feedback on where to put them? Whether it's temporary or staying within, or are we gonna get to that?
We can address it now or later.
Is it already written in here?
No, I left it more or less as a question.
Okay. We'll get to it when we use that page then.
Okay.
Any issues with on premises being added to the definition of temporary sign? No. Page 9. Sign prohibitions.
I was confused about what was going on here.
Yeah.
I think we changed
So
their-
this is the first time I add notes. The notes are not intent, you know,
Right.
they're
like a
just trying to me
comment,
to
yeah.
express, yeah,
But I just
so the
see
logic of it.
everything's been crossed out except balloons.
Yes.
That was for environmental reasons, because we've all seen Lithia's balloons blow away. And we all know it's not great for environment.
But I think she would say.
So why don't we just say that balloons are,
I don't even know what festoon is. I even Googled it and I can't even find a picture.
It's in current code,
Mhm.
so we just brought it forward, but.
if we remove all the other ones, I would prefer to rewrite number 1, so it's just,
Yeah.
balloons are
Expressly agreeable.
prohibited
Yeah.
instead of leading up to it, a single bullet. That's just an observation there.
Yep.
Well,
portable signs,
Well,
say 1A and 4.
are you interested in
The change to
allowing,
one,
yeah,
yeah.
that change,
Allowing all the rest.
yeah.
feather
That's under
flags,
one, yeah.
balloons, air activated devices, such as air dancers.
I think that one.
Everybody
Yeah.
gets an air dancer. I often get referred to as an air dancer because I'm 6 foot tall and a string bean, so.
Do you wave your hands around? a lot?
And that's probably a festoon, because it's like. really blown out.
I guess my comment earlier, I have a hard time saying that we should allow things that we really kind of don't want to see in the city, just because we currently don't enforce against them. So.
Is it like right, how we have it now, they would be allowed to have unlimited number of feather flags, etc.
That was gonna be my next argument. Like,
Yeah.
really, you wouldn't hurt my feelings if you said, like, all the rest of them stayed and just called feather flags, because that's pretty much what you see anyways. But I do think that, definition for, maybe an allotment for footage of frontage or something like that, so we just can't plaster a dozen feather flags in front of
Or-
your place.
A 2-story tall air activated dancer.
Are feather flags intended to be temporary signs?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Not always.
Okay,
Yes and no.
I see them rather permanent a lot, and
They're intended to be taken inside a lot of the time,
Okay.
because
they can blow
Like
over.
a sandwich
Yeah.
board.
if they don't take them inside, then they will deteriorate a lot faster than if they did.
I'd say it's fairly self-evident. This is a product that is desired in for a good portion of the business community.
The feather flags.
The feather flags, I mean, they're
Food trucks and.
feeling fairly ubiquitous and they're in use quite a bit. So whether or not you want me to come up with some language,
Can we just take those, strike D? But then unstrike A, C. Oh, and I guess what's the difference between a feather flag and a pennant? Pennant literally, like it hangs and it's triangular shaped? Or is it
I
on
think
a
it's
stick?
like the little rope,
Yeah.
the rope triangle.
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Those are
I see
signs.
the same issue with those and I think with the balloon.
Mhm. So leave those stricken and just take feather flags out and the rest are still prohibited.
That's fine with me.
Zoning commission, okay?
Could we consider if we take feather flags out of here, putting a number limit somewhere wherever we decide to find like volume or something to think about?
With your permission, I'll come up with
You have one per
some form
frontage.
factor,
Yeah.
and you guys can then expand or contract
Yeah.
on it.
That sounds good.
And how about the flashing, blinking, scrolling video or varying light intensity signs?
I would love if that was still in there, but
Is it possible to, so going back to our electronic animation, is it possible to keep flashing, blinking video or varying light intensity, but remove scrolling?
yeah,
Of course. That's
I mean,
what you
I'm
just
asking,
said.
like,
Yeah.
sign folks, is that technically feasible?
It's very hard to define in many ways, because I see flashing, blinking as your whole sign turning off, turning on, turning on, turning on, turning off, turning on, or fading in, fading out, fading in, fading out. That's how I take this.
Hmm.
Where the video is obviously going towards the EMCs and having video. I think a perfect example is the AAA security or something like that over on the overpass by East Helena that has the red and blue police light bar on top of it is absurd. It grabs attention to that sign, but I would define that as the flashing, blinking. I think back to the old school signs, the little flickering on the 11-watt light bulbs. I think those should be allowed still. I don't think they're a distraction at all.
keep getting with the light bulbs.
No, so it's hard. I just feel like this needs a better definition and not necessarily just all flashing, all
I
blinking.
think we're talking about electronic signs when I think of this.
Yes,
Mhm.
and I think the reason we're gonna remove that from the not permitted is because we have the definition.
We could put it in the
sign
electronic
lighting
sign.
standards.
Yeah.
That is addressed, that was the reason.
Okay.
But then if
There.
somebody does have like, literal police lights on their sign.
That's already defined as expressive.
Yeah. Might it be better instead of having this definition be in terms of what the sign is doing? Write a definition in terms of its effect on people, so that if writing something that is lights that cause a distraction, lights that cause some sort of issue.
If you read part, it has it already.
Where?
No sign or its illumination may interfere with traffic safety or simulate emergency services.
So that would do the police light piece. I just think when you go to have the effect on people, then that's where they'll just be like, oh, well, they didn't like
Subjective.
the pumpkin spice dog one, but maybe if I changed it to this other exact equal thing, it's fine. And so then it becomes like, the complaint driven process. Okay, well, it's the same thing. And so I think that's where if you could say it's, it's the activity, not the subject matter.
I think it's harder to enforce too, especially if we get into having citizens or sign industry professionals
provide guidance.
report
Yeah.
when something is not legal. It's hard to say that had a particular effect on somebody. I don't know if it did.
I think it's a good, I mean, I think we would probably all be open to doing that same thing. I mean, obviously Mike reached out to us in regards to when we put ours up, that people were complaining it was too bright. So I mean, we worked with you, I mean, the city to dim it, you know, over 30%, I think. And that was just a simple, quick email on here, we got an issue. I think that the on-premise, off-premise industry would have no problem helping everybody out with that. I mean, especially if it happened to be their sign or our sign, I'm sure they have no problem running in there and saying, hey, could you tone this down a little bit, just to help monitor some of that stuff to where kids can become a happy medium. And because I mean, as they said too, as you go in there and help them control that a little bit, it's only gonna help people move forward with everything, you know, and then it's gonna, you know, it'll kind of, everybody will kind of catch on where like, I can't do this, you know, this is just. I just think the industry itself has no problem going in and helping with that to help monitor that.
If I might just jump in here again real quick, this is Earl. I think the other thing we need to remember is, for the most part, 99.9% of the owners of these are only trying to enhance their business. And so if anybody, whether it be the city or some of us in the sign community, go in and say, hey, you know, that's annoying people, they're going to want to change it anyway, because they don't want to annoy their potential customers. They want to draw their customers in. And so, you know, I think that we just need to keep that in mind. I don't think everybody's out to just do the most obnoxious thing there is, especially once we let them know, hey, please understand this is annoying people and that's costing you customers. I think they're going to tone it down just from that standpoint alone, because again, why did they spend that kind of money on it in the first place? But to bring in business, not to distract or to send people angry down the road.
So zoning commissioners, can we leave this one stricken
Put something in the electronics section.
and, yeah, rely on instead
Okay.
definitions and.
Yeah.
Okay. We do have one hand raised online. James, I know you've had your hand raised for a while, so thank you for your patience.
Oh yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to make a quick mention that there was a lot of enforcement talk in relation to electronic signs in particular, due to the variability of the programming that can be done. What I would suggest you consider something like an affidavit, which I already sent to Michael. And what that does, it basically states that the operator has received the code. They know what the operating limitations are for the electronic sign, and they will abide by these. And if they don't, you know, you guys are going to go after them. I mean, in a very nice way, but you know, you will take some action of some sort. But I think that helps a little bit when it comes to enforcement issues with electronic signs. And that's something, it doesn't have to be in a sign code. It would just be part of your building, you know, permit process prior to issuance of a building permit. So thanks for that. I appreciate the ability to pipe in.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. All right, how about, I know the perspective on number 3.
We'd like that.
Because
we're kind of addressing it in the other section of the ordinance.
So right, so it's in two places. The idea is they're prohibited for you putting in a new one, whereas in the other section, is the sunset provision. So it's in two places because they're performing two different functions around the billboard signs. I will surround it again, because this is again something that will be covered when we rewrite the previous section. I'll also just do this. I'll be doing this one as well.
Okay. All right. Page 11. I am fine with the change from should to shall. How about the changes to temporary signs?
I think these, are pretty much the definition of the sandwich board signs anyway, so maybe we should put sandwich board signs under temporary signs.
Oh, I see. We don't specifically name any sign under temporary signs, though. I see why you did what you did in the definition. Makes sense to me now.
So the other thing that is stricken here is the time limit. Correct?
As I said, bureaucracy last time, huh?
I mean, you weren't wrong. It seems needlessly fussy.
So on the article in the IR, there was one comment that I noted related to temporary signs. I know that the direction we're going is not the direction that I think the commenter mentioned political signs and requirements around taking them down a certain number of days after elections have happened.
Yeah.
We
So
can't regulate them separately.
That's, Earl, could you chime in where that's regulated from, according to you?
That's actually a state law.
Okay.
That political signs have to be removed within 30 days of the election. And that is state law. And actually, the campaign can actually be fined. The campaign can be fined if they leave them up. So that is in fact, a state law.
Okay, that's helpful.
So if that is content-based, I would prefer the state to be sued.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we add it back because my impression is that is very content based.
Yeah.
Okay. So zoning commission, any issues with the changes here in temporary
No.
signs?
Well, if I might chime in one more time real quick, I was just thinking about the part of it that says it cannot be lit in any fashion whatsoever or any manner. I'm just thinking about every year the Halloween store puts up a big banner that would be considered a temporary sign. But most people are out shopping in the evening and for Halloween costumes and things of those natures. If they can't shine some light on them, then they really aren't really doing any good for them at all. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the answer or anything else. I'm just saying those are other things that need to be considered when we talk about, no lighting whatsoever. I do think that there can be a limit put on temporary signs. I think that would be important, 30, 60, 90 days, whatever, if they're going to run a sale or a special or open up a temporary location for a couple of months.
So there's one fair point in there where I've generally been considering, as writing this temporary signage to generally be site signage. The banners, certain, or like window signage, but really I've been thinking about yard signage, for the most part. So maybe we can separate the lighting standard for wall as different from, site signage.
I think in this case, what Earl's referring to would be covered under the fact that we have a definition for banner. But that was something else I'm gonna talk to you about later, was a little bit of to tweak the definition of banner. In some way to say, signs constructed with flexible material and fit in for temporary use and suspended from, continue with the regular verbiage that's already there. But, just to call it out in the definition that it's intended for temporary usage. So in that case, a banner could be lit under the sign lighting standards too.
And I apologize that, the banner is a comment I received from on premises people, that I failed to get everything here.
Thank you. Thank you mentioned it.
I think I mentioned it in my preamble, but that was a very long time ago. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I recognize that it is not feasible probably for the city to enforce a day limit on something that is exempt and doesn't require anybody to tell you when it first went up. However, I like the idea of having some sort of a limit in code so that if there is something that is someone notices is up for an egregiously long time, there is a code standard that says, okay, that one's been up for 180 days. It's definitely not temporary anymore.
There was some in like Shopko, or a good example, that have been up for years and then they blew over and they stayed blown over forever. And I won't lie, I finally went and picked them up. They got rid of them. Because
Yeah, maybe a good example is like the parking. You know, like, oh, you're not supposed to park somewhere for 72 hours. It's not like you have to put a sign on your car that says park there on a certain day. It's complaint based. Come and check and put the mark on your car, right? So maybe that's a different way to do it, where you don't have to have all the realtors and such put a whole different section on their signs and reprint all their signs, but if there's some sort of time frame, we could say if someone calls in a complaint about a temporary sign, could start.
Yeah. Would you want it to be set at like 180 and then we're just sort of able to identify egregious offenders at that point?
I'd say no more than 180. Sure.
Half a year after someone's mad.
Yeah.
Or if they can prove it was already, I don't know, had already been.
And is there an interest in splitting out temporary signage for site versus building? For illumination purposes, or otherwise?
Would that be a illumination restriction necessary for where it is placed, or is it more about the zoning district? That would make the difference, because otherwise I could see a temporary sign that's placed on a monument sign or a temporary sign that's placed on the building, both being okay for illumination. If it's in, you know, more of a commercial zone, but if it's in a residential area, you probably don't want them lighting them up, right?
I think if it's being treated as if it's a banner placed on the wall of a building, that seems like it's being treated as a wall sign, even though it is temporary. And therefore, it should just have the same illumination standards as allowed by district for a wall sign.
I think even some event signage that's temporary, like the fairgrounds and the fair, for example, it gets dark. And people entering exit, there might be banners at the fairgrounds that need to be lit up at night for people to be able to see. The temporary use business, like Earl was saying with Spirit Halloween, I mean, they're in there for a month. They need to be seen. It's right when it's starting to get dark early, they're open past that. So maybe if it's regulated to business hours, kind of like it is in the residential districts for business sign lighting, for the lighting to be shut off after business hours or operation hours of the event. Something.
Can you work on something? Since it's 9.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll like it.
I mean, we do already specify that A-frames can't have like electronic message faces or be illuminated, and we call that out separately. I mean, it might just be where we call out the different sign types separately in the lighting section. Yeah.
Okay. how about, so again, for temporary signs, the aggregate area piece, is everybody so generally good with that? Instead of specifying
With the what?
the aggregate area, instead of specifying the types of signs.
Yeah.
And then moving on to page 14. We just have the addition, a change from directional to incidental major and incidental minor.
It's fine.
Okay. Page 16 and carrying on to 17. We changed to the 0.3 foot candles instead of nits. I'm fine with this change. Sounds like this is what is industry standard. I like that it adjusts, it's against ambient light, so that takes into account the time of day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
I like it.
Okay.
Once I understood it, I like
Yeah.
it.
And then, so at the bottom of page 17, we've got the change to allow electronic message displays to take up the whole sign face, which we heard Michael explain earlier.
My feelings on this are directly related to where we end up with electronic signs.
So what they can actually
What
do.
they can do.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, leave it stricken. Are we good with taking out the color temperature for electronic message displays? Sure, I'm fine with that as well. Okay. Anything else on the changes on page 18?
No.
Leave it with 7.5 seconds. Pending more conversation around what this.
One thing I want to point out is on C, where monument is stricken, this would allow electronic message centers on monument signs.
Interesting.
Just want to make sure you're not breezing over
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
and,
I didn't notice that.
But otherwise, I think it's in keeping with the conversation to leave it stricken.
Yeah. Any issues?
My feelings on this are directly
Same.
related to electronic signs.
Betsy, do you have any concerns about?
No, I think we just need to have a bigger conversation about
About
electronic design.
Okay.
And yeah, I think I need to look into how some other places have tried to come up with a nice line. I don't know how else to do
I'd
it.
like to bring back language as written in a couple of different codes. and see
Yeah.
what you guys are most comfortable with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, page 19. Some verbiage changes.
That was a poorly written section right there. And that number E, that didn't make no sense.
What?
We're gonna call it number E, I mean.
Number E.
All right, page 22. Nathan, see you got your hand raised, go ahead. No? You got that.
Yeah, just going back to page 18 and item C, this says awning billboard canopy. I know it's part of the larger electronic display discussion, but billboard is listed in there. So if that is to go in as red, that would mean there's 0 digital billboards allowed. That's how I read it, at least.
Yeah, I will,
Good catch.
I'll circle that because there's another. We're revisiting the billboard conversation with.
Correct. Yeah, it kind of muddled in a lot of different conversations, but the way it reads just on paper without having been here, that's how it read. So I thought I'd just call that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
You're good.
You're done.
You're good. Okay, page 22. Directional. So we don't have directional sign anymore. Right?
Oh, yeah,
With incidental signs.
incidental.
So is this meant to be incidental sign?
This is simultaneously taking feedback on directional signs. But yeah, this should be stricken and we should be looking at the incidental. Looking at them as incidental signs. But I left it there as reference.
If I might jump in here on the one per additional frontage with a curb cut for property. What about, let's just say McDonald's and Wendy's both. They have two curb cuts and they have an entrance and an exit. And if you only allow them to have one directional sign, do they put the direction on entrance or do they put the direction on exit?
No, so this is the major one, so this would be a much larger sign, they, as written, the incidental, oh, I'm sorry, the incidental, one per curb. The incidental minor, they get one per curb cut, whereas the incidental major is, not in here. I'm sorry, so this directional sign one is supposed to be rewritten as incidental major. So take out directional sign, right, incidental major.
Okay.
And this is a larger sign, up to 8 feet in height. And I did it as an 8x4. I didn't, that's not a, those aren't numbers I'm necessarily in love with. Those are placeholder numbers, just turning this document around for you. But this is for essentially when you're giving to show dare or something like that. This is a type where they have, or the hospital or something where it's one facility, they're only allowed one freestanding sign in the code as written. This allows them a much larger directional sign on the or much larger essentially directional sign that can direct people to different buildings and that kind of thing. That's sort of the intent of this one. So this isn't this is not the much smaller directional signs that for entrance and exit. This is a what you guys had originally called a pylon sign, but that verbiage was I thought kind of too confusing, so I built it off of the incidental verbiage from James, because a pylon sign is also a freestanding sign, so I didn't want to confuse those.
And another example would be, say, the Ashley Furniture, because they have a major pylon sign on Montana Avenue, but their frontage is actually on Dredge Drive, and so they might want an incidental major to direct people to come in.
Right, so this would allow them an incidental major on that second frontage. This is essentially an alternative idea to what on-premise is actually asking for, which is where if they have two frontages, they just get two freestanding signs. So this is sort of a
Middle ground.
a different option to chew on if people are comfortable with it. Man, I'm really just trailing off here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let's finish up here.
So essentially the idea is that their second one would need to be like directional in concept. I mean, if it's meeting the definition of an incidental
Yes.
sign.
Correct.
And incidental, can they be like freestanding up on a stick, or are they generally like monumental? I can't remember.
So the design standard for the incidental major, I put a 8-foot height limit and a 24 square foot total sign area. So that's an 8x4 sign, and
Okay.
I think generally is going to fit that need.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm good with that. That's written. Page 23, incidental minor. Any issues with that addition? No. Okay.
I'm sorry, Michael, did I hear you right? I thought you said 8x4 and then you said 24 square feet, you meant 32, right?
Hey, that's math.
8x3.
8x3 then. Would you guys still be okay with 8x3?
I think 32 would be way better.
Yeah, 32 would be better.
It's more of the standard, 4x8 sheet.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Okay, freestanding sign. One side is permitted per frontage.
Mhm.
All right. Keep that change, thank you.
Something for that with the incidental
Yeah,
major.
Sorry, I didn't catch your, didn't follow your question.
this,
This is in addition, with the
This-
incidental be in addition,
yes,
right? This is not saying only one and incidental is included. This is additional.
this is, one side is permitted for frontage, and then we would also be allowing the incidental major
Mhm.
on that because they have a secondary frontage.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so
Do
you're
they
doing
need
middle,
to
you're doing
freeze?
middle ground with the
Mhm.
incidental major and also allowing an additional sign for frontage.
I'm bringing this forward as
Yeah.
the on-premises, company's wishes is to have a second freestanding sign for the frontage. The incidental major was not brought forward by the on-premises companies, although I
Okay.
do
We take it,
like
we
the
can get it.
idea.
Yeah.
But this would be allowing, this would be a departure from the current code in, allowing more than one freestanding sign. Essentially per use or per building. However it's written.
I
say
prefer
no.
the middle ground way personally with the major option. And the one freestanding sign. I don't know how everyone else feels. I liked the way that was set up.
Yeah, I agree with that. One freestanding sign per building. There are other types of signs that can go on other frontages, correct?
Mhm.
That can direct people.
Yep.
Okay.
Not okay. Revert this back.
Yep.
And then, probably, I think that makes sense with the incidental signs in. So.
Usually there's a primary frontage
Mm.
and then that kind of helps. People figure out where the better front door is even.
Okay, page. 29. I think.
Oh, here's the same report.
Yeah, so the suspended sign for this one was, brought to my attention that it was causing some confusion whether or not they could have a suspended sign in addition to their freestanding sign, and then why would they do that? And what are we trying to do here? And I actually think this should be struck from the R4, RO, and RU. This is really just a way to allow for a sign, in residential areas, and basically this is for non-conforming uses that want to update and don't need to necessarily come before a board of adjustments to replace their sign that's out front for their business that's been there 100 years.
Yeah.
That's more or less the intention there.
So the C freestanding signage requirements doesn't mean this just is the same allowable. It means you get your freestanding sign and not this. So
Yeah. And yeah, I was confused by this because I didn't want to say not permitted. It's not like if you're in a B2, you're not allowed to make a sign of that type. So I wasn't quite sure how to let them know that they don't get to have that in addition to a freestanding sign. You just get to have a gigantic sign if you want, or this little dinky sign.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so, just perhaps needs more wordsmithing.
yeah,
Or maybe,
Or are you allowed to have a freestanding sign, max height 5 foot, 12 square feet area in their residential?
right, yeah, no, that's the easier way to do this, make my life too hard. Alright, suspended sign, is what you're allowed to have is a freestanding sign in a residential district, and probably,
Unless we're trying to add an additional design standard and we want them to look, because we had talked about it, that upside down L shape is what we were talking about. Specifically for this, and I don't know if we will lose that by sticking it in the freestanding sign section, and if we care.
I think we just need to wordsmith how you wrote the freestanding signage requirements for
Okay.
the three. And keep suspended sign. I don't want to rehash that conversation.
Okay.
We already had it. It was good. Stick.
okay,
Page 30. The wall signs. This is where I think we're gonna be looking for some additional feedback from you all. To get these numbers right.
I'll be curious to see what you guys come up with, because it sounds like according to at least the variance requests and the data we have, that 3% usually covers folks. But, right?
Covers the bigger.
it covers the bigger
Covers the
buildings.
But it's
bigger,
not the
yeah.
middle littlers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The sign program might help with that.
the sign program could probably cover the bigger buildings that need exceptions. We need to figure out if you guys can provide me examples of signs that you guys have done and those calculations on some local buildings, and I don't have a good idea of what percentages you guys are looking for. I just don't, if you guys can show me something, we'll figure it out.
I think we're pretty open under this, because I don't think we hear as much about wall signs. Some of our other.
And then page 31, the last one.
So, I know I just have it done in the R4RO. That ask should have been repeated for the other sections. The ask is that we separate out window signage, from the wall signage sizing requirement again. You know, I kind of think that makes sense. The windows are an architectural element and are, you know, whether or not they want to be doing anything with the light or not, or otherwise. Their sign is their primary motivator and driver of business to their lot.
Okay, with that.
I do have one comment on 31 on window signs that they may not be displayed above the ground floor windows. I have a couple customers downtown that don't have windows or frontage at all on the main level of the building, and the building owners will not allow them to put any window graphics down there. And even though they're not going to be seen, they had us put them on the second story windows. It's right across the street from Silver Star.
Oh,
There's that big building there, and they're I want to say they're dermatology.
Clothing Associated Dermatology is another example. Can't think of the name of them.
well, there's some on the walking mall, back 10 miles.
Yeah. Their business is on the
Yeah.
second story specifically.
Yeah.
And the landlord just won't allow them to do this signage on the first floor, so I think a new definition or new verbiage on that would be important.
I agree with that.
Like an exception if you don't have a ground floor window.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd be in favor
how-
of just striking A entirely too, and just letting the business decide which floors they want.
Yeah,
Give it that, Michael.
Scatter shop, random, or.
920.
It's too late for
920
that.
kind of an idea.
thoughts, yeah.
That will, I think, also help with some of the historic preservation. pieces and
Oh, you
some
are?
of those buildings if they're not.
Well, I'm gonna be in
Happy
the
with the second
office
floor.
building while doing that. So I
Well,
gotta-
we have not
Yes,
addressed.
that's another thing that we have dealt with too, on the work building, having a lot of real. So we refer to windows for their signage
Yeah.
because they don't have the ability to.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
And what you'd like for Mount Laura?
To recap, you guys wanted us to kind of take the current code, say what we'd like to stay with the current code potentially, as well as the updated code. with the proposed language that we suggest as an industry. You also ask for districts we agree on, that's off-premise should be in, as well as the square footage heights, just kind of samples of all of that, and then just standards within the industry, correct? Sure. To recap, and I can email that out to everybody.
Or just, for us, you can just send it.
Send it to my own.
Or April, we'll circulate it.
Yeah.
And what's our next step?
Yeah.
Skip November, is that what you would like?
I'd like a minute to continue pulling in public comment and to process this and to just get you guys a better draft and have it vetted by legal, because we're now kind of out of date with them. And then meet again in December. At your regularly scheduled Tuesday.
When is that, in December?
Second Tuesday,
Okay.
in December. I believe it's the 12th. No?
Yeah, it's the
Yes,
12th.
okay. Nailed it, 9:20. I know my dates.
And I guess just for awareness, we will likely have a hearing that night, so our work session will only be 1 hour.
Yeah.
So if there is anything that you can provide to us
Prior,
well in advance that we can process, since we won't have much time to actually work through stuff in that 1 hour.
1 hour. Give ourselves a quick deadline to get you guys stuff over to Michael.
yeah, I'll try to make it, some of this is complicated, but I'll try to give you clear options maybe then, and then you're picking from a fairly refined menu. I'll do my best to that, so that.
Is there any way you can shoot for the 5th? Send us out materials.
Oh, ideally,
Yeah.
ideally, I'm trying to get you, what I hopefully will become our standard, which is, 2 weekends.
Nice.
But in terms of their input, if you can get that to us as soon as you get it, that would be great.
Oh, yeah,
They're-
do you want to comment back out to you on a little basis?
Yes. Please.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys so much for all your work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, folks online. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.